When I was growing up, we lived in a decent part of town, not fancy, but safe enough, or so I thought. My mom didn't work, so she was usually home with me and my siblings, who were all around the same age. One morning, chaos broke out as we were scrambling to get ready for school. I was about 13, rushing around, trying to find my shoes, when I stepped on a shard of glass. Pain shot through my foot, and I yelped, hobbling to the kitchen to check the damage. Blood was trickling from my heel, and I knew there was no way I'd make it to school on time without causing a scene. My siblings were already on edge, grumbling about being late, and I couldn't find the damn Band-Aids anywhere. My dad, always the problem solver, decided to take my siblings to school while I stayed behind to sort myself out. "You're staying home," he said, grabbing his keys. "Your mom's here. You'll be fine." Score, I thought. A whole day to myself. After Dad left with my siblings, Mom and I patched up my foot, and she decided we'd go shopping to grab some supplies. She headed out, leaving me alone in the house. At 13, I wasn't thinking about danger. My mind was on the freedom of having no one bossing me around. The house felt like my kingdom. I grabbed a book, scooped up our cat, and headed to the backyard. The sun was warm, the grass soft under my feet, and I sprawled out, letting the cat bat at my shoelaces while I read. It was peaceful, almost too quiet, but I didn't mind. After a while, though, boredom crept in. The cat wandered off, and I got tired of my book. So I headed inside, flopped onto the couch, and turned on the TV, flipping through channels to find something worth watching. That's when I noticed something off. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shadow moving past the window. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light. Then I saw it again, a man creeping low, peering into the house. My stomach dropped. I froze, staring at him through the glass. He looked right at me, and for a split second, his eyes widened, like he was just as startled as I was. Then, to my surprise, he straightened up and knocked on the window. A deliberate, almost polite tap. I know it sounds stupid now, but at the time I thought he knocked. If he was dangerous, he'd just break in, right? So, like an idiot, I stood up and cracked the door open, keeping the chain lock on. "Hey kid," he said, his voice calm but rough, like he smoked too much. "That beat-up car in the driveway, is it for sale?" He gestured toward my dad's old junk, a rusty sedan we hadn't touched in years. I relaxed a little. Maybe he was just some guy looking for a deal. I don't know," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'll tell my dad someone asked about it." He nodded, gave me a thin smile, and walked off. I closed the door, my heart still racing, but I shrugged it off. He's gone. No big deal. I went back to the couch, turned up the TV, and tried to focus on the show. About an hour later, I heard a noise, a faint rattling from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was the cat messing with something, but then it came again, sharper, like someone was trying to jiggle the door handle. My blood ran cold. I muted the TV and listened. The sound stopped, then started again, more insistent. Someone was definitely trying to get in. I slid off the couch and crept toward the adjacent room, which had glass doors leading to the backyard. My heart was pounding, so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I reached the glass doors, I heard another sound, a window being tampered with, the frame creaking under pressure. My eyes darted to the glass door next to me, and I saw the handle twitch like someone was testing it. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, and my legs were shaking. Looking back now, the memory still gives me chills, the sheer terror of realizing I was alone, trapped, with someone trying to break in. The rattling stopped for a moment, and I thought maybe they'd given up. Then I heard it, a faint scraping from the bathroom. That tiny window in there, high up on the wall, was never locked. It was small, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through, but someone was messing with it. I could hear the glass shudder as they pushed against it. That was it, my cue to get the hell out. I didn't think, I just ran. I bolted for the front door, flung it open, and sprinted outside, screaming at the top of my lungs. "I've got a gun. We've got cameras. Stay the hell away." I don't know where that came from. I didn't have a gun, and we sure as hell didn't have cameras, but I was desperate to scare them off. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house. I pounded on their door, gasping, tears streaming down my face. They let me in, and I blurted out everything. They called my parents, who rushed home. When my family got back, we canvassed the entire block, asking neighbors if they'd seen anything suspicious, a strange man, a car, anything. No one had seen a damn thing. It was like the guy had vanished into thin air. The police came, checked the house, but found no signs of a break-in, no fingerprints, nothing. Just the faint scratches on the bathroom window frame, which made my skin crawl. I'm 25 now, guys, still living within 15 miles of that old house. Looking back, I realize how naive I was, how close I came to something truly dangerous. That man wasn't interested in the car. He was testing if I was alone. The thought makes my stomach churn. I still hate being home alone, even now. The memory of that day, the sound of the door rattling, the shadow at the window, the feeling of being watched, it sticks with me. It probably always will. Growing up, my family lived in what I thought was a quiet, safe neighborhood. It wasn't until I was older that I learned it was actually a lower-income part of town. Still, we had amazing neighbors who always looked out for us, and that probably saved us from a lot of trouble. My dad worked long hours, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and my mom was a secretary at a hospital, so she was often gone during the day. Usually, my younger sister and I had a babysitter, but by the time I was around 8 or 9, I was considered old enough to watch her on my own. This was the 90s, mind you, not exactly a safe era, but it felt safer than today, especially with our neighbors keeping an eye on things. I was about 8 or 9, making my sister 5 or 6, and this story is about one of the first times I was left in charge of her. It was a regular weekday, and my sister was sitting in her high chair, munching on whatever lunch mom had left for us, probably sandwiches or some fruit. I was bustling around the kitchen, feeling like the big man of the house, when there was a knock at the front door. That alone was strange. We didn't get many visitors, except maybe the kid from across the street who'd come over to play. But he'd usually just bang on the door and yell my name like a wild animal. This knock was different, calm, deliberate. I was young and naive, not thinking much of it, so I went to the door. We had a locked screen door, and I kept it shut, peering through the mesh. Standing, there was a middle-aged man in a yellow t-shirt and dirty jeans. I don't remember his face or build clearly, but those clothes stuck in my mind. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice small but polite, no alarm bells ringing yet. He smiled casual-like and said, "Hey there, are your parents home?" That's when the first warning sparked in my head. My parents had drilled it into me. Don't trust strangers. But I was a kid, and the danger didn't fully click. Instead of lying smartly, like saying mom was in the shower or upstairs, I blurted out a half-lie. My mom went to the store. She'll be back in a minute. I don't know why I said that. Maybe I thought it sounded safer than admitting she wouldn't be back for hours. Looking back, it scares me how clueless I was. The man nodded, unfazed. "No problem," he said. "My dog went missing, and I think it might have run into your backyard. Mind if I come in so we can check it out?" My sister was my first thought. She was sitting there, defenseless in her high chair, happily eating her food. No way in hell was I letting this guy into the house. I wasn't that dumb, but I didn't want to seem rude either, so I went with a middle ground. "The gate should be unlocked," I said. "You can check the backyard yourself." I closed the door quick, heart beating a little faster, and locked it for good measure. Now, I was curious. A stray dog? That sounded cool, even with this weird guy around. I wanted to see if there really was a dog and if he'd catch it. So I ran to the back window, which gave me a clear view of almost the entire yard, including the gate. I stood there, nose practically pressed to the glass, waiting. But the man never showed up. Not at the gate, not in the yard, nowhere. I waited a few minutes, squinting into the corners of the yard, but there was nothing. No dog, no guy. It was like he'd vanished. That's when it hit me, something was off. My stomach twisted, but I didn't fully grasp how bad it could have been. About 5 minutes later, there was another knock at the door. My guard was up now. I wasn't thrilled about this guy coming back, and I was getting tired of the whole thing. I crept to the door, keeping the chain lock on, and cracked it open just enough to see him. "Did you find her dog?" I asked, trying to sound calm but feeling uneasy. I can't recall his face, but his voice sounded desperate, maybe even a little annoyed. "No, I looked all over the yard and couldn't find him," he said. "Look, I got a picture in my car if you want to see it, just in case you spot him." That was it for me. No way was I going outside with this stranger, especially not with my sister in the house. She was my responsibility, and I wasn't about to mess that up. "You can leave the picture in the mailbox," I said, my voice firm. "We'll keep an eye out." I shut the door fast, locking it tight. What happened next still gives me chills. Almost right after I closed the door, there was another knock, this time not on the screen door, but on the actual front door. That shouldn't have been possible. The screen door was locked, and unless someone opened it, no one could reach the main door to knock. My heart started pounding, and I felt a cold sweat creep over me. I grabbed my sister from her high chair, her little face confused as I carried her to my bedroom. I told her to stay quiet and crept back to the kitchen, where I could peek out at the front yard. There he was, the man, hurrying back to his car. But what saved me was Joan, our son of a next-door neighbor. She was standing on her front lawn, cigarette in hand, staring him down like a hawk. I don't know if she saw something or just had a gut feeling, but her presence must have spooked him. I didn't tell my parents about it for years. Looking back, it freaks me out how close my sister and I came to real danger. That guy wasn't looking for a dog, he was testing me, seeing if I was alone. It wasn't until I was older that I pieced it together, and the thought makes my skin crawl. I'm still debating whether to tell my parents now. I don't want to upset them, especially since so much time has passed, but I feel like it's an important story, maybe a life lesson for my two younger sisters, one of whom is getting married soon. That day, I was just a kid trying to do my job, keeping my sister safe, but I came so damn close to failing. I've been tight with my group of friends since kindergarten. 4 of us, all guys now 29 or 30 years old. At the time this happened, we were 28 or 29, and we were still close, even though college and life had spread us out, making our meetups rare. We were all in steady, long-term relationships, married or close to it, except for Andy, who just gone through a brutal divorce. His ex-wife left him right as his mom was dying of cancer, so it was no surprise he was in a rough spot. We were all worried about him, trying to keep an eye out without smothering him. One of my buddies owns a nice country house, tucked away from the hustle and bustle, perfect for a weekend retreat. We had one planned, a chance to kick back, eat, drink, and just be together like old times. A week before, Andy said he wasn't coming. He didn't want to be the only guy there without a partner, and it felt like a sore spot for him. We pushed a little, but he mentioned he had another event that weekend, a bar thing with some other friends, so we let it go. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he needed a change of scenery, something to lift his spirits. So on Saturday morning, right before I left for the country house, I decided to give him one last shot. Standing at my front door, keys in hand, I called him up. He answered, but something was off. His voice was sluggish, like he was half asleep or out of it. "Hey man, you sure you don't want to come?" I said, trying to keep it light. I even joked, "What, you still in bed or something?" He didn't laugh, didn't even react, which wasn't like him. I expected him to brush me off or sound annoyed, but instead, he just mumbled, "Okay." It caught me off guard. "All right, cool," I said. "Pack a change of clothes, and I'll swing by to pick you up." He didn't say much else, just a low hum of agreement, and I told him to meet me out front. My wife and I drove the 45 minutes to his place, and when Andy got in the car, I knew something was wrong. He wasn't himself. He moved slow, like he was wading through water, and his face was blank, almost vacant. I tried cracking jokes to loosen him up, but he didn't bite, not a chuckle, not a smirk. He barely spoke, answering with one-word grunts or slurred phrases that didn't make sense. "You good, man?" I asked, glancing at my wife in the passenger seat. She gave me a look like she was picking up on it too. Andy just nodded and said, "Yeah," in this flat, hollow tone. My wife and I exchanged worried glances. Was this depression? Was he on something? We didn't want to pry too hard, but the vibe was off, and it set my nerves on edge. We got to the country house, And the place was perfect, quiet, surrounded by woods, the kind of spot where you could forget the world for a while. The other guys were already there, and we dove into the weekend, good food, cold drinks, and video games. Yeah, we escaped civilization to play games like we're still kids. It's our thing. Normally, Andy would have been right in the mix, trash-talking and laughing, but not this time. He was like a ghost. He didn't touch the controllers, didn't join in on the banter. He just sat there, staring at us or out the window, his eyes wide like he was watching something incredible unfold. It was creepy as hell. One of my friends swore he kept tabs on Andy and noticed he didn't eat or drink anything. Not a single bite or sip. He didn't even go to the bathroom, which was weird for a whole day. We tried to get him to talk. "Andy, you sure you're okay?" We'd ask, taking turns. Every time, he'd give the same robotic response. "I'm okay." No explanation, no emotion, just those two words. It was like talking to a wall. Eventually, we gave up, figuring he'd snap out of it if we left him alone. As the night went on, he wandered outside and sat on a bench, staring at a stretch of woods near the house. We stayed inside, eating, drinking, and talking, but we kept an eye on him through the window. He didn't move, just sat there, frozen, like he was in a trance. Before we went to bed, we checked on him. "You coming in soon, man?" I asked. He didn't even turn around, just said, "Yeah, I'll be in soon. Just want to chill out here for a bit." We didn't push it. We figured he needed space, so we left him and hit the sack. The next morning, late Sunday morning, I woke up and checked Andy's room. His bed was untouched, the sheets perfectly made, like no one had slept in it. My stomach sank. I went outside, and there he was, still on that damn bench, in the exact same position we'd left him in, staring at the woods. His clothes weren't wrinkled, his hair wasn't mussed. Nothing about him looked like he'd moved an inch all night. I was freaked out. "Andy, what the hell, man? Did you sleep out here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He just looked at me, blank as ever, and said, "I'm okay." That was it. I'd had enough. The whole thing felt wrong, and I wasn't about to stick around to figure it out. I told the others we were leaving, and we packed up fast. Everyone was uneasy, but no one said much. We said our goodbyes to the other guys, loaded the car, and I drove Andy home, dropping him off at his place. The whole ride, he barely said a word, just stared out the window. Later that night, we all met up again at a restaurant for a mutual friend's birthday. When I saw Andy walk in, I froze. He was himself again, laughing, joking, full of energy, like the Andy we'd known forever. My other two friends noticed it too, and we exchanged puzzled looks across the table. I couldn't hold it in. "What the hell happened yesterday, man?" I asked, leaning in. Andy looked confused, then laughed. "What do you mean?" "My car broke down, and Peter had to pick me up from the bar in the middle of the night." My jaw dropped. Peter, one of our other friends, nodded, pulling out his phone to show us pictures. Andy at the bar, with a bunch of other guys, timestamped from Saturday night. There were multiple photos, clear as day, of Andy at this bar while he was supposedly with us at the country house. We started firing questions, trying to piece it together. I checked my phone history, and sure enough, there was the call I'd made to Andy on Saturday morning. He swore he didn't remember answering it. The three of us, me, my wife, and the other guys, were in a panic, insisting he'd been with us, describing every detail, his sluggish voice, his weird behavior, the way he sat outside all night. Andy looked freaked out too, but he kept saying it was impossible. "I was at the bar," he said, showing more photos, more proof. We couldn't make sense of it. Who the hell was at the country house with us? Who did I drive home? And when I dropped him off at his place, where did that, whoever it was, go? Did they do anything while we were asleep? In the months that followed, the three of us grew wary of Andy. We didn't know what to think. Was it him? Someone else? Something else? He got sick of us bringing it up to the point where he'd get pissed if we mentioned it. You guys got confused, he'd say, brushing it off as the rational explanation. But I'm not buying it. I'm still nervous about it to this day, especially when I think about dropping Andy off at his house. Where did he go after that? I'm not big on paranormal stuff, but I don't have any other way to explain it. It's like a splinter in my mind, and talking about it makes everyone edgy. my wife, my friends, all of us. I just needed to get this off my chest because it still haunts me. I grew up in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands of the UK, and let's just say my childhood wasn't exactly a walk in the park. By the time I was 12, I was already getting into trouble, smoking, drinking, staying out late, and skipping school whenever I could. My mom was working, so I had a lot of freedom, or at least I thought I did. It was around 11 a.m. on a late morning, and I was on a mission to buy cigarettes. Being well under the legal age, 16 at the time, I couldn't just stroll into a shop and buy them myself. Instead, I had to loiter outside and ask strangers to take my money and get them for me. There was this little shop called the Spa about a mile and a half from my house, on a busy road lined with houses on one side and a row of hedges on the other, with a gap leading into a field beyond. I stood about 20 paces from the shop, eyeing people as they passed, trying to guess who might be willing to help a kid like me. I asked a woman, maybe in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length hair, wearing black business trousers and a pink elbow-length jumper. She looked like she might smoke, but she just said no and kept walking. Then I tried a guy, mid-50s, shaved brown hair, in blue jeans and a white t-shirt. He ignored me completely, didn't even glance my way. I was getting desperate, ready to ask anyone who came by, no matter how unlikely they seemed. That's when I spotted him, a disheveled man coming up the road, past the hedges. He wore dirty dark brown suit trousers and a buttoned-up dark brown velvet jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. On his head was a black bowler hat, tilted slightly, and he walked with a limp, dragging one foot a bit as he moved. He looked rough, probably homeless, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s. But I figured, asterisk, he probably smokes. Worth a shot. Asterisk, as he got closer, I stepped forward and hit him with my usual line. "Excuse me, mate, could you go into the shop and get me some smokes?" He stopped, looked me over for a second, and asked, "How old are you?" I lied, puffing out my chest a bit. 15, 16, I said, trying to sound older. He nodded, like he was thinking it over, then held out a grimy hand. "All right, which ones do you want?" I handed him the exact change for 10 sovereign cigarettes, feeling a rush of excitement that I might actually pull this off. He went into the shop, and I waited outside, practically bouncing on my toes, thinking I'd finally get my smokes and head home to chill before I had to fake coming back from school. A few minutes later, he came out and handed me a pack of 20 sovereign. I was confused, my heart sinking a little. "Wait, I only gave you enough for 10, I said, panic creeping in. I didn't have any extra cash to cover the difference, and I started fumbling in my pockets, hoping I'd missed a coin or two. Before I could say anything else, he hooked his arm through mine, gripping it tightly, and started walking me back toward the hedge-lined road. His hold was firm, pinning my arm to his side, and he was moving fast, his limp barely slowing him down. All the while he was talking, his voice low and steady, saying I could make up for the extra cigarettes if I didn't have the money. My mind went blank. I was stunned, my feet moving automatically as he led me along. I guess I was in shock, too overwhelmed to process what's happening. He pulled me through the gap in the hedges, into a wide open field that stretched out forever, with more fields beyond it. The sound of cars on the road faded, growing quieter with every step. He kept talking non-stop about how I could come to his house and help him fix roof tiles or some nonsense. I wasn't really listening. My head was spinning, my heart pounding. The fields were empty, no houses in sight, just endless grass and sky. I realized I had to get away, but my body felt heavy, like I was stuck in a bad dream. Finally, something snapped in me. As he kept walking, still holding my arm, I yanked back with all my strength, pulling my arm free. The sudden move caught him off guard, and he stumbled forward, crashing to the ground in a heap. He groaned, clutching his leg like he was in pain. "Why'd you do that for?" he moaned, his voice pitiful. "I really hurt my leg. Help me up, come on, help me up." He held out his hand, still lying on the ground, looking up at me with those green eyes. I froze, staring at him, my mind racing. Something wasn't right. My gut screamed at me to run, to not touch him, to not get any closer. "I brought you those cigarettes, didn't I?" he said, his voice sharper now. "I helped you out. Why'd you do this? Help me up." I took another step back, my breath shallow. He stopped groaning, his hands still outstretched, and then he pointed at me, locking eyes. "You're a smart one," he said, his voice cold, like he was sizing me up. It was like a jolt of electricity shot through me, snapping me out of my daze. I turned and ran, legs pumping as fast as they could go. I didn't look back, didn't dare. My lungs burned. My heart felt like it was going to burst, but I kept running, weaving through the gap in the hedges, back onto the road. Even then, I didn't stop. I sprinted, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, terrified he was behind me. By the time I hit the next street, I was gasping, out of breath, and that's when the tears came. I started bawling, shaking uncontrollably, the reality of what just happened crashing over me like a wave. I didn't stop running until I got home, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were trembling as I sank to the floor, still clutching the pack of 20 Sovereign. I was terrified I'd see that man again, his dirty velvet jacket and bowler hat burned into my memory. I never went back to the spot to buy cigarettes after that, not ever. The thought of running into him again made my skin crawl, and even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling of how close I came to something truly awful. Living in New York City, you get used to the quirks of the place, the hustle, the noise, and the characters you meet on the streets. One of those quirks is the free hug guys who pop up in parks and tourist-heavy spots like Union Square, holding signs offering free hugs to anyone passing by. Most of them are harmless, just spreading a bit of positivity. They'll give you a quick hug if you're up for it, or they'll smile and wish you well if you pass. It's usually a wholesome thing, part of the city's charm. But 2 years ago, I had an encounter with one of these guys that was anything but wholesome, and it left me shaken. I live in Brooklyn, and on this particular day, I got to Union Square to meet my dad, who was visiting from upstate. I got there early, so I texted him to say I'd be waiting on the steps of the park. It was a busy afternoon, the square buzzing with people, tourists snapping photos, street performers doing their thing, and vendors selling everything from pretzels to handmade jewelry. I found a spot on the steps, sat down, and started scrolling through my phone to kill time. That's when a guy approached me, holding a free hug sign, his smile wide and inviting. He was one of those free hug guys, offering a quick embrace to anyone who looked interested. I'm a petite young woman, and living in a big city like New York has made me cautious. I've dealt with enough aggressive catcalling to know better than to engage with random men on the street, and honestly, I'm not big on being hugged by strangers. So I politely wave him off, saying, "No thanks," with a small smile, wishing him a nice day. I figured that'd be the end of it, and he'd move on to the next person. But a few moments later, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I glanced up, and he was still there, standing a few feet away, staring at me. Not smiling, not offering hugs to anyone else, just watching me, his eyes locked on mine. My stomach twisted. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was overreacting, but the way he lingered felt wrong. I decided to move, picking up my bag and walking to another spot on the steps, hoping he'd get the hint. He didn't. He followed me, his footsteps deliberate, keeping pace just a few steps behind. My heart started racing, but I kept my head down, pretending to be absorbed in my phone. Then he spoke again, his voice sharper this time. "Why don't you want a hug from me?" he asked, like I'd personally offended him. I froze, my fingers tightening around my phone. I've dealt with pushy guys before, but this felt different, too insistent, too personal. I turned to face him, keeping my voice calm but firm. "It's nothing against you," I said. "I just don't like being touched by strangers." I thought that would be enough. I wasn't rude, just clear. But he didn't back off. Instead, he stepped closer, his free hug sign still dangling from one hand, and kept pressing. "Come on, just one hug," he said, his tone almost demanding now. My skin crawled. I'd never seen one of these guys act like this. Usually, they're all smiles and good vibes, not this aggressive persistence. I'd had enough. I stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder, and started walking out of the park, hoping to lose him in the crowd. "Look, I don't mind you offering hugs," I said over my shoulder, trying to keep things civil, "but you're following me, and it's starting to creep me out." That's when he lost it. His face twisted, and he started yelling, cussing me out right there in the middle of Union Square. "You think you're too good for me?" he shouted, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "If you don't leave this park right now, I'm gonna punch you in the damn face." My blood ran cold. I didn't wait to see if he meant it. I started running, weaving through the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced back, and he was still following, his sign bouncing as he kept up, still yelling threats. I scanned the park for a cop. Union Square is usually crawling with NYPD. But just my luck, there wasn't a single officer in sight. My legs were shaking, but I kept moving, dodging past tourists and vendors until I spotted a Starbucks across the street. I darted inside, the bell above the door jingling as I pushed through. I looked back through the glass, and thank God he didn't follow me in. He stood outside for a moment, glaring, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there, catching my breath, my hands trembling as I ordered a coffee I didn't even want, just to have a reason to stay inside until I felt safe. When my dad arrived, I told him everything, my voice still shaky. By then, the guy was long gone, and though we looked around the park, there was no sign of him. I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear, like he could pop up again at any moment. That encounter stuck with me, and ever since, I've been extra cautious about going to Union Square or any similar place alone. I later found out that this particular free hug guy was arrested last year after he actually punched a woman in the face. Apparently, he had a history of getting aggressive, following women, and threatening them if they refuse his hugs. This is New York, though, so who knows if he's back out there, holding his sign, offering hugs but ready to snap if you say no. The thought still makes my stomach turn. Back in 8th grade, about halfway through the school year, I started getting calls from an unknown number. I was just a kid, maybe 13 or 14, and I usually didn't answer numbers I didn't recognize. Sometimes I'd pick up by accident, but I'd hang up after a second or two when I realized it wasn't someone I knew. That changed one day when I answered, and a man's voice came through, saying my full name in a questioning tone, like he was checking if it was really me. "Yeah, that's me," I said, thinking maybe it was one of my parents' friends or someone they knew. I was naive, not sensing the danger, and that was a big mistake, though I didn't realize it at the time. I don't remember much about that first call, just that he hung up soon after I confirmed my name. I brushed it off, figuring it was nothing. A few days later, maybe less than a week, another call came from an unknown number. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just spam, but the calls kept coming one after another until I finally picked up. This time, the guy started asking me what TV shows I like to watch. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but something about it made my skin crawl. I got the sense I shouldn't be talking to him, so I mumbled something vague and hung up. My heart was beating a little faster, but I told myself I was overreacting. The calls didn't stop. They kept coming, sometimes a couple in a day, and I started dodging them again. Finally, after what felt like endless ringing, I answered and snapped, "Stop calling me." His response was chillingly calm. Hanging up mid-conversation is rude. That's when my dad overheard me. He was in the living room, probably just getting home from work, and he turned to me with a frown. "Who are you talking to?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. I admitted I didn't know who it was and handed him the phone, my hand shaking a bit. Dad took it, his face hardening, and demanded, "Who is this? Stop calling my kid's number." I watched his expression shift from anger to confusion, then back to fury. He started shouting, his voice booming, but before he could finish, the guy hung up. Later, Dad told me the man had said his name, Carlos, in a smug tone, telling him, "Don't be so angry, Carlos," before cutting the line. That freaked me out. How did this guy know my dad's name? From then on, the calls became a daily thing, at least one a day. I'd usually hand the phone straight to my dad, who would yell at the guy to leave me alone. We told our friends and family to stop if they were prank calling me, just in case it was someone we knew messing around. We even contacted the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do since the guy hadn't made any direct threats. I told my middle school too, explaining there was some creep calling me, but it was weird, the calls never came during school hours. At first, they'd hit when I was home alone after school, waiting for my parents to get back. Then the guy switched it up, calling around the time my dad got home from work, like he knew our schedule. His voice sounded young, maybe late 20s, with a slight accent that made me think he could be Latino. He never sounded angry, never said anything outright malicious, but that didn't make it any less creepy. He was a stalker, plain and simple. He knew my parents' names, my sister's names, my dog's name, some of my cousins, even my grandparents. He never called when we had company over, and he never called after 8 p.m., which made it feel like he was watching us, timing it perfectly. One day, toward the end of the school year, I was in my room, sitting on my bed, when another call came through. By this point, I was exhausted by it all. The police had been useless, and the guy hadn't done anything bad enough for them to act, so I answered, figuring I'd just deal with it. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharp but tired. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he started listing off video games: Red Dead Redemption, Modern Warfare 2, Halo 3. My blood ran cold. I looked over at my disk stand, where my games were stacked, and he was reading them off in the exact order, top to bottom. My heart stopped. I jumped up and ran to my window, pulling the curtains aside, half expecting to see him standing in the yard, staring up at me. But there was no one there, just the empty street, the neighbor's dog barking in the distance. He kept going, naming every game on my shelf, and when he finished, he said, "You got good taste in games. We should play sometime." His voice was so casual, like we were buddies. I couldn't speak. I was scared shitless, tears welling up in my eyes. I hung up, threw the phone across the room, and started crying. I called my dad, my voice shaking as I told him what happened. He left work early, rushing home, his face pale when he walked through the door. We sat down and realized we'd been idiots. The solution was staring us in the face. Change my number. We did it that day, and I locked down my Facebook, setting everything to private. My parents did the same with their accounts, just to be safe. After that, the calls stopped. 6 months later, we moved to a new house, and I never heard from the guy again. But the memory stuck with me. I'm older now, and just recently, I've been getting calls from unknown numbers again. I don't answer them anymore, not after what happened. Telling my girlfriend about it brought the whole thing rushing back. She reminded me of how creepy it was. I'm planning to change my number again, just to be safe. But I can't stop wondering if it's the same guy. And if it is, how the hell did he get my new number? The thought makes my skin crawl, like he's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to call again. I'm 20 now, a young woman living in Ireland for the past 5 years, but I grew up in a small Eastern European country where tensions ran high. About 40% of the population was of Russian descent, like my family, and though almost everyone spoke fluent Russian, ethnic divides were real. It wasn't uncommon to get worse service in shops or lower pay at jobs if you were Russian, especially in places run by locals. I think that's why I was targeted in this particular story. I've always been small and skinny, which probably made me seem like an easy mark. We lived in a neighborhood of towering Soviet-era apartment blocks, relics of the USSR, housing hundreds of people in cramped, gray buildings. It wasn't the worst area, and my family wasn't exactly poor, but our building was grim. The hallways were dark, reeking of urine or worse, and the old elevator was a creaky, smelly box that often got stuck. Taking the stairs was no better. They were even darker, often occupied by homeless people sleeping or groups of teens doing drugs. The whole place had an oppressive feel, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. For the first year or two in that building, things were uneventful, aside from the occasional run-in with a stoner on the stairs. But then I started noticing 2 local kids, a boy and a girl, hanging around the neighborhood. They kept to themselves, always together, and I assumed they were siblings because they looked so alike, though no one knew for sure. They spoke only a little Russian, enough to get by, and they didn't mix with the other kids. At first, they just stared at me from a distance as I passed by, their eyes following me when I played with friends in the courtyard. I didn't think much of it. They were weird, but kids can be weird, right? I ignored them, focusing on my games or walks home from school. After a while, though, their staring turned into something else. They started following me, taunting me with a few Russian insults they knew, calling me names tied to my nationality, shoving me lightly, or laughing when I tripped. It was annoying, but I had thick skin. I'd either ignore them completely or fire back with what I thought were clever comebacks, hoping they'd get bored and leave me alone. But these kids were relentless. I started wondering why they'd zeroed in on me. I'd never spoken to them, never given them any reason to pick me out. Maybe it was because I was Russian, or maybe they just sensed I was small and an easy target. I brushed it off as kids being kids, even though it was starting to wear me down. One day, on my walk home from school, the duo was on my heels again, as usual. The boy was spewing his usual garbage, crude comments about how I should go back to Russia mixed with random insults, while the girl snorted with laughter, egging him on. I tried to tune them out, not in the mood to engage, my backpack heavy on my shoulders as I trudged toward my building. Normally, they give up after a while, wandering off to bother someone else, but this time was different. They followed me right into the building, their footsteps echoing in the dim, stinking hallway. My stomach tightened, but I kept my head down, telling myself to stay calm. I pressed the button for the elevator, the familiar hum of its gears grinding in the distance, and hoped they'd lose interest. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a rough grip on my shoulders. The boy grabbed me from behind, his hands like clamps, and before I could react, the girl joined in, twisting my arm behind my back in a way that sent sharp pain shooting through my shoulder. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. They didn't answer, just started dragging me toward the staircase, the dark, filthy staircase where no one would see us. "Shut up," the boy hissed, his grip tightening. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. This wasn't their usual teasing, this felt sinister, like they had something planned. I struggled, twisting against their hold, but they were stronger, and my small frame was no match for both of them. Just then, the elevator dinged, and a middle-aged woman stepped into the hallway. Her face showed a flicker of confusion as she saw us, me thrashing against these two kids. "Is anyone going up?" she asked, her voice flat, like this was just another day. I was desperate, my voice shaking as I gasped. "I am. Please, I need to get in." The boy tightened his grip, snarling, "You're not going anywhere." I looked at the woman, pleading with my eyes, but to my shock, she didn't do anything. She didn't scold the kids, didn't ask what was going on, didn't offer to help. She just shrugged, stepped into the elevator, and let the doors close. I couldn't believe it. Was she too scared to get involved? Did she think it was just kids messing around? Our neighborhood wasn't the safest, and maybe she didn't want trouble, but her indifference stung like a slap. Anger and adrenaline surged through me. I wasn't going to let these two drag me into that staircase. With a sudden burst of strength, I twisted my body and slammed the boy into the wall behind me hard. He yelped, and both he and the girl let go stunned. I didn't wait to see their reaction. I bolted for the elevator, which was still open, and dove inside just as the doors started to close. The last thing I saw was the girl's shocked face, her mouth open as she stared at me, like she couldn't believe what I'd just done. The woman in the elevator didn't say a word, just stood there as we rode up in silence. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged, but I was safe for now. A few days later, I felt a flicker of confidence. I'd fought off those two, and I was pretty sure they wouldn't come near me again. I'd proven I wasn't as weak as I looked. But that relief didn't last long. One morning, a friend knocked on my door, asking if I wanted to hang out. It was a free day, no school, and I was excited to get out. We headed to the elevator, chatting about nothing important, just happy to be together. That elevator was a death trap, creaky, unreliable, and prone to breaking down. As a kid, you always had to wonder who might get on with you, especially in a tall building like ours with so many floors. If it got stuck, you were trapped with whoever was inside, and that thought was always in the back of my mind. We got in, pressed the button for the ground floor, and kept talking, carefree. About 4 floors down, the elevator stopped, and a burly middle-aged man stepped in. He was intimidating, sunken face, greasy hair tied back, a patchy beard, and sweat stains under his arms. His belly was so big it seemed to take up half the tiny elevator, pushing my friend and me into a corner. We went quiet, the air suddenly heavy. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at us with cold, unblinking eyes as the doors closed. My friend and I exchanged a glance, both of us uneasy. Then, in a deep, hoarse voice, he spoke, slow and deliberate, looking right at me. "You think you're so tough, don't you?" It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. My heart sank. Before I could respond, he hit the elevator's stop button, and the car screeched to a halt, the sudden jolt making my stomach lurch. He reached out, grabbed my braid, and yanked me toward him, pinning me against the wall. Pain shot through my scalp as he pulled, lifting me slightly so my toes barely touched the floor. I squealed, the sound sharp and panicked, while my friend shrank into a corner, frozen with shock. "I can be tough too," he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I clawed at his hand, trying to make him let go, but every move made the pain worse, strand of my hair ripping out. I stopped struggling and stood on my tiptoes, desperate to ease the tension on my scalp. "You think it's funny to hurt my son," he growled. It hit me then, the boy I'd slammed into the wall must have told his parents, probably leaving out the part where he and his friend attacked me first. Or maybe this guy didn't care. He didn't seem like the reasonable type. "I know what floor you live on," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "If you ever touch my son again, I'll put a knife through your throat in this damn elevator. Do you understand me?" My blood ran cold, my body trembling. Before I could answer, the elevator lurched again. Someone must have called it from another floor. He narrowed his eyes, let go of my hair, and stepped back, acting like nothing had happened. Another person got on a few floors down, and we rode the rest of the way in silence, my friend and I too scared to speak. The man's threat echoed in my head, but what scared me even more was the thought that his son had been watching me, stalking me, figuring out where I lived and what my routine was, just to set me up for this. My friend and I never talked about that day again. It was too much. After that, whenever I saw those two kids, they kept their distance, just like before, but now they'd grin at me, smug and knowing. It made my skin crawl. The fear of that man, his threat, and the fact that they knew where I lived stuck with me, a constant reminder of how vulnerable I was in that bleak, stinking building. A few days ago, my girlfriend was in a car accident. Nothing too serious, but enough to leave her sore and shaken. She's been sleeping on the couch since then, curled up with a heating pad to ease the aches, which means I've had the bed to myself. I'm a regular drinker, nothing heavy, just a beer or two most nights. But the night this happened, I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol or anything else. It was around 10 p.m., and I was lying in bed, propped up on pillows, scrolling through Reddit on my phone. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of a salt lamp on the bedside table, casting warm shadows across the walls. I was getting tired, thinking about turning off the lamp and calling it a night, when a strange feeling hit me, a prickling sense that I wasn't alone. I've never been afraid of the dark, not really, but open doors and odd shadows have always made me a little uneasy. The laundry room is right off our bedroom, and we're lazy about closing the door, so it usually stays swung wide open. That night, it was no different, the dark rectangle of the doorway staring back at me like a void. Something about it felt off, heavier than usual. I reached over to the salt lamp and turned it up brighter, hoping the extra light would chase away the weird vibe. As the room lit up, I focused my gaze on the laundry room, scanning the shadows. That's when I saw it, low to the ground, maybe a foot from the floor, the head of an old woman. It wasn't floating or disembodied. It was craning out from the doorway, like she was peeking around the corner, her neck stretched unnaturally. She was smiling, a wide, crazed grin that sent chills racing down my spine. Her eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, and I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stared back at her, paralyzed by that eerie smile. My heart was pounding, my palms clammy as I gripped my phone. I don't know how long we stayed like that, seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt like forever. Something in me snapped, and I decided I had to get up. I didn't know why, I didn't have a plan, but I knew I couldn't stay lying in bed, vulnerable, with that thing watching me. As I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, I must have broken eye contact for a split second. When I looked back, she was gone. The laundry room was empty, just a dark, silent space. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself to move, flipping on every light in the room. Overhead, bedside, even the closet light. I checked every corner, every shadow, but there was nothing. No old woman, no trace of anyone. I stood there, heart still racing, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't drunk, wasn't high, wasn't even sleepy. I've been wide awake, scrolling on my phone. I've had minor creepy experiences before, like feeling a chill in an empty room or hearing a strange noise, but nothing like this. Nothing I could see. Growing up, I lived in a small town just outside a bigger city, a quiet place with farms and cul-de-sacs lined with beautiful villas. My parents bought a house on a street with 15 of those villas when I was 2, and I had my own room, a safe little space at the front of the house. Even back then, I never felt uneasy in that room, but this moment in my bedroom, years later, was different. It shook me to my core. I didn't sleep much that night, leaving every light on until the sun came up. I kept replaying it in my head, the way her head craned out, that unnatural grin, the way she vanished the second I looked away. I don't know what to make of it. Part of me wants to believe it was just my imagination, a trick of the light or exhaustion, but it felt so real, so vivid. I'm terrified it'll happen again, that I'll see her tonight peeking out from the laundry room or somewhere worse. I could use some advice, anything, to help me process this, because even thinking about it now gives me the chills. When I was growing up, my family lived in a quiet, small town just outside a bigger city, a place dotted with farms and tidy cul-de-sacs lined with beautiful villas. Our street had 15 of these homes, and when I was 2, my parents bought a one-story house with a basement that doubled as a TV room, a master bedroom, a laundry room, and rooms for me and my big sister Emily. My room was at the front of the house, with a window facing the front yard and the street, separated from the front door only by a staircase leading to the basement. Even though I was on the first floor, you'd need a chair or something to see into my room from outside, so I always felt safe there. Emily's room, on the other hand, faced the backyard, her window opening to a view of the garden and the quiet beyond. Under my window was a small patio with garden furniture, 2 chairs and a table, where we spent many summer days eating ice cream, the sweet drip of it melting down our hands as we laughed under the sun. As we got older, Emily, who was 3 years older than me, developed a rebellious streak. By the time I was 13 and she was 16, she had a habit of going to bed early, pretending to sleep, only to sneak out through her window to meet friends. Her room's window was perfect for it, low enough to climb out without much effort. But getting back in was trickier. She couldn't easily climb back through her own window, so she'd bully me into leaving my window ajar. That way, she could sneak back into the house through my room when she was ready to come home. I was a heavy sleeper, so it didn't bother me much. I'd rather stay out of her drama and turn a blind eye than deal with her wrath. She could be fierce when she didn't get her way, and I just wanted to keep the peace. One summer evening, though, something happened that I'll never forget. I was 13, fast asleep in my room. The window cracked open as usual for Emily's late-night return. Around midnight, I stirred, woken by a faint noise outside, shuffling, like someone moving around on the patio. I figured it was Emily fumbling her way back in, so I rolled over, too tired to care, and tried to drift back to sleep. The sound grew louder for a moment, a soft scrape of shoes on the concrete, and then I heard another noise, heavy footsteps climbing the stairs from the master bedroom in the basement. That had to be Dad, I thought, probably up for one of his late-night cigarettes on the back porch. I braced for a fight, expecting him to catch Emily sneaking in and blow up at her. I buried my head under the pillow, not wanting to get dragged into their argument. But no yelling came. The shuffling outside stopped, and the house fell silent again. I assumed Emily had made it back in without getting caught, and I fell back asleep, not thinking much of it. The next morning, though, everything changed. Mom woke me up earlier than usual, her face tight with worry. "Did you hear anything strange last night?" she asked, her voice low, like she was trying not to alarm me. I didn't want to rat out Emily, so I just shrugged and said, no. She didn't look convinced. "Come with me," she said, leading me out to the patio. My stomach dropped when I saw it. On the white table, clear as day, were 2 massive muddy footprints. They were way too big to belong to Emily, who was a skinny 16-year-old girl. These were heavy, adult-sized prints, pressed deep into the dirt smudge across the table's surface, like someone had stood there, maybe peering into my room. The sight made my skin crawl, a cold wave of fear washing over me. I stood there, staring at those prints, my mind racing back to the shuffling I'd heard. It wasn't Emily. Someone else had been out there, right outside my window in the middle of the night. I felt sick, realizing how close I'd been to whoever left those footprints. Mom's face was pale, her hands trembling as she looked at me, waiting for an explanation I didn't have. I didn't tell her about Emily's sneaking out, still loyal to my sister, but the fear in my chest was overwhelming. I kept thinking about Dad's footsteps, how they'd come up just as the shuffling stopped. He must have gone out for his cigarette and scared the person off, his presence saving us from whatever they planned. I'm so damn grateful for that. After that night, I never left my window open again, no matter how much Emily begged or bullied. I didn't care if she got mad. I wasn't going to risk it. The memory of those footprints, stark against the white table, still haunts me. I can only imagine who was out there, standing on our patio, maybe watching me sleep through that cracked window. The thought makes my blood run cold, even now years later. My sister and I are fraternal twins, born prematurely, which left us both small for our age and marked by health issues from the start. I was the sicker one, always in and out of doctors' offices, while my sister was born with autism, which made her more vulnerable in her own way. Our rough start in life made our mom fiercely protective, maybe even paranoid. Our biological dad was a mess, a real nutcase, so when we were young, Mom took us and fled, moving us around constantly until we finally settled in a small rural town when I was about 5. By then, we had a new stepdad, a good guy who brought some stability to our lives. The town was quiet, with friendly neighbors who made it feel like a safe haven, despite our rocky beginnings. Mom's paranoia shaped how we grew up. She was so scared of something happening to us that we were barely allowed to play in our own backyard, which was surrounded by a 6-foot chain-link fence. It felt like a fortress, but even that wasn't enough for her. When we finally learned to ride bikes years later, she only let us go 3 houses down the street, and only if she could watch us from the front lawn. It was frustrating. Sure, we could play outside, but it never felt like freedom. We'd pedal back and forth, always under her watchful eye, knowing she'd lose it if we strayed too far. Over time, though, she got to know the neighbors, and they became her unofficial lookouts. If we rode past their houses, they'd call out to her, "Hey, your girls just went by," and she'd relax a bit. By the time we were 12, she let us have a 3-block radius to ride our bikes, which felt like a huge deal. We laughed and teased each other, feeling like little rebels, not realizing the whole neighborhood was keeping tabs on us for Mom. One day it was getting late, close to sunset, and we were at the edge of our 3-block limit, chatting at a stop sign about random nonsense, probably some silly joke or what we do tomorrow. My sister and I were small for our age, looking more like 8 or 9 than 12, which always made people underestimate us. I was starting to get nervous because I've always been afraid of the dark, and the sky was turning that deep orange that meant night was coming fast. We were about to head home when a white van pulled up beside us. A woman leaned out the window, smiling warmly. "Hi, girls," she said, her voice sweet but somehow off. "We've lost our puppy. Could you help us find him? We're so worried." My heart sank. Mom's warnings flashed through my mind like a siren. Don't talk to strangers. Don't go near anyone you don't know. I froze, my hands tightening on my bike's handlebars. My sister, though, looked at me with big, teary eyes, her face crumpling at the thought of a lost puppy. Her autism made her an easy target. She felt things deeply and didn't always pick up on danger the way I did. She was ready to help, her lip quivering, but I wasn't having it. "No, thank you," I said, my voice polite but firm, trying to keep things calm. "Come on, sis, let's go." I grabbed her handlebar and started pulling her away, pedaling toward home. The woman's smile vanished, and as we rode off, I heard her and someone else in the van start yelling after us, their voices sharp and angry. Come back," they shouted, but I didn't look back. My sister was sobbing now, mad at me for dragging her away, saying we should have helped find the puppy. I didn't care. Something about that van, that woman, felt wrong, and I wasn't taking any chances. We pedaled as fast as we could, the wind whipping past us, my heart pounding in my chest. My sister's cries echoed in my ears, but I kept my eyes on the road, determined to get us home. When we finally burst through the front door, I locked it behind us, my hand shaking as I caught my breath. I told Mom everything, my voice trembling as I described the van, the woman's fake smile, and how they'd yelled when we rode away. Mom's face went pale, but she hugged us tight and said, "You did the right thing." She was proud, but I could tell she was scared too. My sister was still upset, torn between her anger at me and her worry for the imaginary puppy, but she never went anywhere without me, so she followed. To this day, I don't know if those people were really looking for a dog or if they had something darker in mind. That white van, their sudden anger when we didn't take the bait, it haunted me ever since. The way they yelled as we pedaled away, the way my sister's tears didn't stop until we were safe inside, it all felt too close, too real. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach churn. I'm just glad I trusted my gut and got us out of there, because something tells me we were one wrong move away from something much worse. The forest was supposed to be our haven, a weekend escape for just the two of us, far from the clamor of city life. But as we turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to our campsite, the sight of an abandoned car, its doors flung open, sent a shiver racing down my spine. It stood there like a warning, a stark reminder that even in the embrace of nature, the unexpected could be waiting just beyond the next bend. We've been planning this camping trip for weeks, dreaming of leaving behind the stress and noise of the city. My partner Alex was already buzzing with excitement, talking about the hikes we'd take and the stars we'd gaze at. But now, that eerie car, sitting silently by the roadside, cast a shadow over our plans. "Do you think someone needs help?" Alex asked, a trace of worry creeping into their voice. "Maybe," I replied, though something about the scene felt deeply wrong. "We should check it out." We pulled over, the gravel crunching under our tires, and approached the car cautiously. It was an older model, dusty and weathered, as if it had been abandoned for some time. The driver's door hung wide open, swaying slightly in a breeze. Inside, the seats were empty, but a few personal items, a backpack, a water bottle, were scattered across the interior, as if their owner had left in a hurry. "Hello," Alex called out, their voice echoing in the stillness, but there was no answer, just the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. We'd exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the situation settling over us like a heavy fog. It was strange, unsettling, but there wasn't much we could do. With a final glance at the car, we returned to our vehicle, resolving to report it to the park rangers when we had the chance. The road wound deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around us, their branches weaving a canopy overhead. Despite the unsettling start, the beauty of the surroundings began to work its magic. The dense green foliage, the soft hum of the forest, and the promise of our retreat slowly eased our nerves, and we found ourselves slipping back into the rhythm of the drive. Our campsite was nestled beside a small, tranquil lake, its water shimmering in the afternoon sun. We set up our tent, the familiar routine grounding us in its simplicity. By the time we had everything in place, the early tension had faded, replaced by the thrill of being in such a breathtaking place. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, we cooked dinner over an open fire, the scent of wood smoke and sizzling food filling the air. We talked and laughed, the abandoned car slipping to the back of our minds, a mystery we deal with another day. Night fell, and the stars emerged one by one, twinkling in the vast expanse above. We lay on a blanket by the fire, pointing out constellations, the cool night air a refreshing contrast to the heat of the day. It was perfect, the kind of moment we'd come here for. But as the fire burned low and the forest grew darker around us, the sense of unease crept back in. It was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of my neck, a nagging feeling of being watched. I tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to the eeriness of the abandoned car earlier. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked suddenly, sitting up and peering into the darkness. I listened, straining to hear over the crackle of the fire. For a moment, there was nothing but the usual sounds of the forest, crickets, a faint breeze rustling the leaves. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, the sound of footsteps moving slowly through the underbrush. "Probably just an animal," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. We both sat still, listening intently, the fire casting flickering shadows that danced around us. The footsteps paused, then continued, growing closer, the sound louder in the stillness of the night. "Hello," Alex called out, their voice steady despite the tension in the air. Again, there was no response, just the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. We exchanged glances, the unease blossoming into something more tangible, a knot of fear tightening in my chest. Maybe we should check it out, Alex suggested, reaching for the flashlight. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we stood, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness as we moved away from the safety of the fire. The forest was silent now, the trees looming around us, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. We followed the sound, though the footsteps had gone quiet, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to press in from all sides. My heart pounded in my chest, each step taking us farther from the campsite's fragile safety. Then we saw it, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the flashlight, partially obscured by the trees. It was a person, their features hidden in shadow, watching us silently. "Hello," Alex called again, their voice echoing in the darkness. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, a silent presence in the night. My skin crawled with unease, the situation taking on an ominous edge. "Maybe we should go back," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Alex nodded, and we slowly backed away, the flashlight beam steady on the figure until we reached the edge of the campsite. As soon as we were back in the circle of firelight, we turned and hurried to the tent, the sense of safety a fragile illusion. We stayed up, rekindling the fire, its warmth and light a comforting barrier against the unknown. The figure didn't reappear, and eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and we retreated to the tent, though sleep was hard to come by. I awoke in the early hours of the morning, the first light of dawn just beginning to filter through the tent's fabric. For a moment, I lay still, the events of the night replaying in my mind. Then I heard it again, a soft rustling, the unmistakable sound of something or someone moving just outside. Heart pounding, I sat up, straining to see through the dim light. The rustling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I held my breath, listening intently, but heard nothing more. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and cool, the forest bathed in the soft glow of early light. Everything seemed normal, yet the sense of unease lingered, a stubborn weight in my chest. Alex joined me, their expression mirroring my own, wary, uncertain. We exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between us. We needed to leave. We packed up camp quickly, the earlier excitement of the trip overshadowed by the events of the night. As we drove back down the dirt road, the forest closing in around us, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking our every move. We reported the abandoned car to the park rangers as planned, but the mystery of the figure in the forest remained unsolved. It was a reminder that even in the heart of nature, the unexpected could lurk just beyond the edge of the familiar. As we left the forest behind, the tension began to fade, replaced by the comfort of returning to the known. But the memory lingered, a haunting reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. The forest had shown us its darker side, but we had emerged unscathed, a little wiser and a little more wary of the unknown. The first gunshot shattered the night like a thunderclap, jolting me awake from a restless sleep. For a moment, I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just a dream. Then another shot rang out, closer this time, and the sickening realization hit me that this was all too real. It had been Rachel's idea to come to this remote corner of the national forest, a place renowned for its pristine hunting grounds. "It'll be fun," she'd said, her eyes sparkling with that adventurous glint I'd always adored. Just us girls, roughing it in the wild. Emily and I had agreed, eager for a break from the relentless pace of our city lives. We'd arrived yesterday afternoon, the three of us crammed into Rachel's beat-up Jeep, our gear piled high in the back. The drive had been filled with laughter and excited chatter about our plans, hiking, stargazing, maybe even trying our hand at fishing in a nearby stream. As we set up camp in a small clearing, I felt a flicker of unease. The forest seemed too quiet, the shadows between the trees too deep, their edges sharp in the fading light. I shook it off, blaming my city girl nerves and an overactive imagination fueled by too many horror movies. We'd spent the evening around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. Rachel entertained us with tales of her previous camping trips, her voice animated as she described close encounters with wildlife and starry nights in the wilderness. Emily, ever practical one, went over safety precautions, her tone serious despite the marshmallow smudge on her cheek. "Remember," she'd said, "hunting season doesn't start for another month. If you hear any gunshots, something's wrong." Those words echoed in my head now as I fumbled for the flashlight in my sleeping bag, its beam cutting through the darkness of the tent to reveal Rachel's and Emily's frightened faces. "What was that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Rachel, always the bravest of us, was already unzipping the tent flap. "Poachers, maybe," she said, her jaw set in a determined line. "We should—" Her words were cut off by another shot, so close it made my ears ring. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice, a scream, high and panicked, abruptly silenced. "Oh God," I breathed, my hand flying to my mouth. That wasn't an animal. We huddled together in the tent, hardly daring to breathe. The forest had gone deathly quiet, as if every creature was holding its breath alongside us. Then we heard it, branches snapping, heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush. They were coming closer. Rachel made a snap decision. "We need to run," she hissed, already shoving her feet into her boots. "Grab what you can carry and let's go." Now, we scrambled to obey, stuffing water bottles and energy bars into our day packs with shaking hands. My mind was a whirl of panicked, half-formed escape plans jumbling together. Just as we were about to make a break for it, a beam of light swept across our tent. We froze, praying whoever was out there wouldn't notice the shadows of our huddled forms. "Check that tent," a gruff voice commanded. "Make sure we didn't miss anyone." My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would give us away. I watched in horror as a hand reached for our tent zipper. In that moment, I was certain we were going to die. But then miraculously, another shot rang out in the distance, followed by shouts. The hand withdrew, and we heard rapid footsteps moving away from our tent. We didn't waste our chance. As soon as the sound of footsteps faded, we burst out of the tent and ran. I had no idea which direction we were going, only that we needed to get as far from our campsite as possible. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful during the day, was now a dark maze of shadows and hidden dangers. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Rachel pulled us to a stop behind a large fallen tree. We crouched there, gasping for breath, straining our ears for any sign of pursuit. "What do we do now?" Emily whispered, her face pale in the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy. Rachel, always our leader, took a deep breath. "We need to find help. There's a ranger station about 5 miles east of here. If we can make it there." She was cut off by a distant shout. They were still out there, still hunting. We set off again, trying to move as quietly as possible while still covering ground quickly. Rachel took the lead, her outdoor experience guiding us through the dense forest. I was in the middle, with Emily bringing up the rear. That's when I heard it, a soft gasp, followed by a thud. I turned to see Emily on the ground, clutching her ankle. "I tripped," she said through gritted teeth. "I think it sprained." Rachel and I exchanged a look of despair. We couldn't leave Emily behind, but helping her would slow us down considerably. "It's okay," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We'll help you. We're all getting out of this together." We got Emily to her feet, supporting her between us. Our progress slowed to a painful crawl, each step an agony of fear and anticipation. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching danger. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, we stumbled upon a dirt road. Hope surged through me at the sight. Civilization, safety. But that hope was short-lived. In the soft dirt on the side of the road were fresh tire tracks, and next to them, large boot prints. "They're ahead of us," I whispered, pointing at the tracks. Rachel nodded grimly. "They must have vehicles stationed on the roads. They're trying to cut off any escape." We stood there, exhausted and terrified, unsure of which way to turn. That's when we heard it, the low rumble of an engine in the distance, growing louder. "Hide," Rachel hissed, pulling us toward a dense thicket beside the road. We huddled there, barely breathing, as a large pickup truck came into view. It was moving slowly, the occupants clearly searching for something or someone. As it passed our hiding spot, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a large man with a bushy beard and cold eyes that scanned the roadside. On the passenger seat beside him, I saw the glint of a rifle barrel. Once the truck was out of sight, we emerged from our hiding spot. "We can't stay on the road," Emily said, voicing what we were all thinking. So we plunged back into the forest, moving parallel to the road but staying hidden among the trees. The going was tough, especially with Emily's injured ankle, but fear drove us on. As the sun rose higher, painting the forest in shades of gold and green, we finally saw it. The ranger station, sitting in a small clearing, a solid, reassuring presence after our night of terror. We broke cover, half running, half limping toward the station. I was crying with relief as Rachel pounded on the door, shouting for help. The door opened, revealing a startled-looking ranger. "What in the world?" he began, but Rachel cut him off, our story pouring out in a frantic jumble. The ranger ushered us inside, immediately radioing for backup and medical assistance. As we sat there, wrapped in shock blankets and sipping hot coffee, the full weight of what we'd been through began to sink in. The authorities arrived soon after, the forest swarming with police and game wardens. They found our campsite, the signs of violence they're confirming our story, but of our attackers, there was no sign. They had vanished into the vastness of the forest, taking their dark secrets with them. In the days and weeks that followed, as we gave statements and tried to piece our lives back together, we learned more about what had happened. An illegal hunting operation, they said, poachers taking advantage of the off-season to hunt protected species. We had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But sometimes, in the dark of night, I wonder about the scream we heard, so human in its terror, and about the cold eyes of the man in the truck, scanning the forest for prey. I can't shake the feeling that what we stumbled upon that night was something far darker, far more sinister than simple poaching. I don't go camping anymore. The forest, once a place of beauty and adventure, now holds only fear for me. Because I know firsthand that in the deep woods, the most dangerous predators aren't always animals. Sometimes they're all too human. The forest was supposed to be our playground, a vast, untamed wilderness where we could explore and conquer the unknown. But as we stood at the entrance of the cave, its yawning darkness beckoning us inside, a twinge of unease gripped me. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, whispering warnings that only the foolish would ignore. We were a group of friends, Jake, Sarah, Mark, and me, bound by a thirst for adventure and a reckless disregard for the unknown. That day, though, the forest felt different, more sinister, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for us to make a mistake. The morning had begun with a promise of excitement. We'd set up camp near a secluded lake, its water shimmering under the bright sun, surrounded by towering pines that swayed gently in the breeze. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, invigorating our senses. It was the perfect escape from the mundane routines of our everyday lives, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. After a hearty breakfast of pancakes cooked over the campfire, we decided to explore the nearby trails, eager to uncover the forest's secrets. Armed with backpacks, water bottles, and a shared sense of curiosity, we set off into the dense underbrush, the path winding through the trees like a serpent, its twists and turns leading us deeper into the wilderness. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon the cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines and moss, its entrance partially obscured by fallen branches. The opening was wide enough for us to enter single file, but the darkness inside was impenetrable, even in the bright light of day. "Looks like an adventure waiting to happen," Jake said, grinning as he peered into the gloom, his flashlight beam dancing across the rocky entrance. "Or a horror movie," Sarah replied, her tone half joking, half serious, her eyes narrowing as she studied the cave's ominous mouth. Despite her reservations, the lure of the unknown was too strong to resist. We gathered our courage, switched on our flashlights, and ventured inside, the beams cutting through the darkness like knives. The air inside the cave was cool and damp, the walls slick with moisture that glistened in the flashlight beams. Our footsteps echoed eerily, the sound bouncing off the stone in a way that made the space feel both vast and claustrophobic. As we moved deeper, the light from the entrance faded, replaced by an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow everything. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, as if the cave itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to make a move. We stumbled upon the first signs of life, an old tattered backpack, its contents strewn across the floor. There were clothes, a water bottle, and a notebook, its pages yellowed with age, the ink smudged and faded. It looked as if someone had been here before us, but there was no sign of them now. "Do you think they got lost?" Mark asked, picking up the notebook and flipping through its brittle pages, his fingers tracing the worn edges. "Maybe," I replied, though the thought sent a chill down my spine. "Or maybe they left in a hurry." We pressed on, the cave twisting and turning, leading us deeper into the bowels of the earth. The walls seemed to close in around us, the ceiling lowering until we had to crouch to continue, our shoulders brushing against the damp stone. The air grew thick with the scent of wet rock and something else, something metallic and sharp, like the tang of blood. Then we found it, a small chamber, the floor littered with more abandoned belongings. Sleeping bags, cooking utensils, and food wrappers were scattered about, all left in haste, as if their owners had fled in a panic. But it was the walls that caught our attention. They were covered in strange markings, symbols etched into the stone, their lines jagged and uneven, their meaning indecipherable. Some looked like spirals, others like crude figures or runes, their edges worn but deliberate. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart, her flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. "I don't know," Jake replied, his beam tracing the symbols, his usual bravado faltering. "But it feels wrong." The air was heavy with tension, the oppressive silence pressing in on all sides. I could feel the weight of the cave bearing down on us, the darkness watching, waiting, as if it were a living thing. We decided to leave, the sense of unease growing with each passing moment, a knot of fear tightening in my chest. As we retraced our steps, the cave seemed to change, the passages twisting and turning in ways I didn't remember. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, the darkness closing in around us, suffocating. Our flashlights flickered, their beams weak and faltering, casting long shadows that danced on the walls like specters. The air was thick with fear, each of us feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. Then we heard it, a soft whisper, echoing through the cave, indistinct and haunting. It was as if the cave itself was speaking, its voice a low murmur that set my nerves on edge, raising the hairs on my arms. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my own fear in check, my grip tightening on the flashlight. "We need to get out of here." We moved quickly, our footsteps echoing in the darkness, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if urging us deeper into the cave's depths. The air seemed to pulse with energy, the walls crackling with an unseen force, as if the cave were alive and aware of our presence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we saw the faint glow of daylight ahead. Relief washed over me, warm and overwhelming, as we stumbled out into the open air. The warmth of the sun was a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive darkness of the cave, its rays filtering through the canopy above. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of our campsite, the familiar surroundings a balm to our frayed nerves. We sat in silence, each of us processing the events of the day, the mystery of the cave weighing heavily on our minds. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, we gathered around the campfire, its warmth and light a comforting presence against the encroaching night. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets chirping and leaves rustling, a soothing backdrop that almost masked the unease still lingering in our hearts. But beneath it all, the memory of the cave persisted, a haunting reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the edge of the familiar. The symbols, the whispers, the sense of being watched. It was a mystery that would remain unsolved, a secret held by the forest, waiting for the next group of adventurers to uncover. We never spoke of it again, each of us content to let the mystery remain buried in the cave's hidden depths. But the memory lingered, a reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. The forest had shown us its darker side, but we had emerged unscathed, a little wiser and a little more wary of the unknown. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, I felt a sense of peace, tempered by the knowledge that the forest held secrets we might never understand. It was beautiful, yes, but also wild and untamed, a place where the line between reality and nightmare could blur. And I knew, despite the fear and uncertainty, that I would return, drawn by the call of the wild, the promise of adventure and discovery in a world that was both beautiful and terrifying. The cave's whispers still echoed in my mind, faint but persistent, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored, hidden in the dark heart of the forest. The forest had always been my refuge, a sanctuary where the troubles of the world seemed to melt away into the whispering leaves and dappled sunlight. But as I stood there, staring at the words crudely carved into the bark of a towering pine, "Go away," a chill crept up my spine, sharp and unsettling. It was a stark reminder that even in the heart of nature, the unknown could lurk just beyond the edge of the familiar, waiting to shatter the illusion of safety. We were a small group, just four of us. My partner Alex, our friend Mark, his sister Lucy, and me. We'd chosen this remote spot for its breathtaking beauty and seclusion, eager to escape the noise and chaos of city life. Our campsite was nestled beside a serene lake, its surface like glass, reflecting the towering pines that swayed gently in the breeze. It was perfect, or so we thought. The first day passed in a blur of activity. We set up our tents with practiced ease, the rhythmic pounding of stakes into the soft earth grounding us in the moment. We gathered firewood, the scent of pine and sap clinging to our hands, and explored the area, marveling at the untouched beauty of the forest. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting golden patterns on the ground, and the air was alive with the hum of insects and the distant call of a loon on the lake. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, we gathered around a campfire, its warmth and light a comforting presence against the encroaching darkness. We laughed and talked late into the night, the crackling of the fire a soothing backdrop to our conversation, stories of old adventures and plans for the days ahead flowing freely. But as the flames began to die down, a sense of unease settled over me. It was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of my neck, a whisper of instinct urging me to stay alert. I tried to shake it off, blaming the eerie ambience of the forest at night, the way the shadows seemed to shift and dance just beyond the fire's glow. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and we retreated to our tents, lulled by the gentle murmur of the lake and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I fell asleep almost instantly, my dreams filled with fleeting images of shadowy figures moving silently through the trees, their presence more felt than seen. I awoke just before dawn, the first light of day filtering through the fabric of the tent, casting a pale glow inside. For a moment, I lay still, disoriented, unsure of what had roused me. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, the unmistakable sound of something or someone moving just outside. My heart pounded, a surge of adrenaline chasing away the remnants of sleep. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the morning air crisp and cool, the forest bathed in the soft, silvery light of early dawn. Everything seemed normal, the lake's surface undisturbed, the trees standing sentinel around us. Yet the sense of unease persisted, a nagging weight in my chest. As I walked toward the lake, I noticed it, the message carved into the trunk of a tree near the edge of our campsite. The words "go away" were jagged and uneven, etched in haste, the bark splintered around them as if the carver had been driven by urgency or anger. I traced the letters with my fingers, my mind racing with questions. Who had left this? And why? I returned to the campsite, my thoughts a jumble of fear and curiosity. The others were awake by then, stirring in their tents, and I called them over to see the message. Their expressions mirrored my own unease as they took in the carved words, the fire pit's ashes cold and gray beside us. "Do you think it's just someone messing with us?" Mark asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed a tremor of doubt. "Maybe," Alex replied, their tone skeptical, their eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting answers to emerge from the shadows. "But it's creepy, right? We spent the morning trying to shake off the tension, distracting ourselves with hikes along the lake's edge and swims in its chilly waters, the sun warming our skin. But as the day wore on, the sense of unease lingered, a shadow that refused to be dispelled by the sunlight, like a storm cloud hovering just out of sight. As evening fell, We gathered around a campfire once more, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the trees. The conversation was subdued, our earlier laughter forced, as if we were all waiting for something to happen. It was Lucy who first heard the footsteps. She froze, her eyes wide as she scanned the darkness beyond the fire's light. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. We all fell silent, listening intently. For a moment, there was nothing but the usual sounds of the forest, crickets chirping, the soft lapping of the lake. Then the footsteps came again, slow and deliberate, circling the campsite just beyond the reach of the fire's glow. Panic set in as we huddled closer to the flames, our eyes darting nervously into the darkness. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching us from the shadows, their presence heavy and oppressive. "What do we do?" Alex asked, their voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart, their hand gripping mine tightly. "Stay together," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though fear clawed at my throat. "We need to stay calm." We stood back to back, scanning the darkness, clutching makeshift weapons, branches, rocks, tightly in our hands. The footsteps stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on all sides, the air thick with tension. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps resumed, retreating into the forest until they faded into nothingness. We waited, tense and alert, but nothing else happened. Whatever or whoever had been out there was gone, leaving only the echo of their presence. We didn't sleep that night, too afraid to let our guard down. The fire kept burning high to ward off the darkness. As the first light of dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, we packed up our camp in silence, each of us eager to leave the forest and its secrets behind. The lake sparkled innocently in the morning light, but the carved message on the tree loomed in my mind, a silent warning. As we hiked back to the car, the events of the past 2 nights weighed heavily on our minds, the crunch of pine needles underfoot the only sound breaking the quiet. We never spoke of it again, each of us content to let the mystery remain unsolved, a shadow buried in the forest depths. But the memory lingered, a haunting reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. The forest returned to its usual serenity as we left, the whispering leaves and chirping crickets masking the secrets it held. Yet, as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the forest was bidding us farewell, or perhaps warning us never to return. Back in the safety of our homes, the events of the camping trip felt like a distant dream, a nightmare from which we'd finally awoken. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I find myself listening for those footsteps, wondering what or who was out there in the darkness. And I hope, with a shiver, that whatever it was, it stays far away from us, hidden in the wild, untamed heart of the forest. The whispers began on our second night, faint at first, so subtle I thought they were just the wind rustling through the trees. But as I lay there in our tent, my skin began to crawl, a primal instinct telling me something was deeply wrong. I've been so excited about this camping trip with Sarah. We've been dating for 6 months, and this was our first real getaway together, a chance to escape into the wilderness and make memories. We'd chosen a remote spot in the Adirondacks, far from the crowded campsites and tourist trails, seeking the kind of solitude that felt romantic, intimate. As we set up our tent that first afternoon, the forest around us seemed alive with possibility, its air crisp and clean, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sarah's laughter echoed through the trees as we fumbled with the tent poles, our hands brushing against each other more often than necessary, sparking warmth in the cool air. When we finally got the tent up, we celebrated with a kiss that left me breathless, the forest canopy framing the moment like a painting. That first night, we sat by the campfire, roasting marshmallows and talking about our hopes and dreams. The flames cast a warm glow on Sarah's face, making her eyes sparkle like the stars above. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be here with her, miles away from anyone else, under a sky so clear it felt like we could touch the constellations. But now, as I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, that sense of isolation took on a sinister edge. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and I realized with a jolt that they weren't coming from inside the tent. They were outside, circling us. I turned my head slowly, trying not to wake Sarah, who slept peacefully beside me, her chest rising and falling with each soft breath. I envied her oblivion, her ability to rest while the world outside seemed to shift into something menacing. Part of me wanted to wake her to share this growing terror, but another part hoped that if I just stayed still enough, whoever or whatever was out there would go away. The whispers continued, sometimes fading to barely audible murmurs, other times growing louder, almost clear enough to make out words. I strained my ears, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to decipher them, but the language, if it was a language, remained just beyond comprehension, like a conversation heard through a thick wall. Then came the footsteps, soft at first, as if someone were trying to move stealthily through the underbrush, their weight crunching lightly on fallen leaves. They circled our tent, pausing occasionally, each pause sending a fresh wave of dread through me. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would wake Sarah, sure it would alert whatever was out there to the fact that I was awake, listening, vulnerable. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen in fear, the minutes stretching into hours. The whispers and footsteps continued their eerie dance around our tent, sometimes retreating, offering a fleeting moment of relief, only to return closer than before, the sound of their approach tightening the knot in my stomach. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, the sounds finally faded away, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. I waited, hardly daring to breathe for what felt like an eternity, my body tense, my eyes fixed on the tent's fabric as if it could shield us from the unknown. When I was sure the noises were gone, I unzipped the tent with shaking hands and stepped outside. The forest looked peaceful in the early morning light, birds beginning to chirp, a light mist hanging between the trees like a delicate veil. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had all been a terrible nightmare, a trick of my overactive imagination. Then I saw them, human footprints circling our campsite, etched clearly in the soft earth. My blood ran cold as I followed the trail with my eyes. They came from the dense forest to our north, looped around our tent multiple times, some prints deeper as if the person had stood still for a long time, just watching, before leading off to the south, disappearing into the underbrush. I heard the tent unzip behind me and turned to see Sarah emerging, her hair tousled from sleep, her eyes still heavy with dreams. "Good morning," she said with a smile that quickly faded as she saw my face, pale and drawn in the dawnlight. "What's wrong?" I couldn't find the words to explain, my throat tight with fear. Instead, I pointed at the footprints, their stark outlines undeniable in the morning dew. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the scene, her hand instinctively reaching for mine. Were there people here last night?" I nodded, my voice caught in my chest. "I heard them. I managed finally." Whispering, walking around the tent all night. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking small and vulnerable in her oversized sweatshirt. "Why didn't you wake me?" she asked, her voice tinged with hurt and fear. I shook my head, guilt washing over me. "I don't know. I was scared. I thought if I stayed still, they'd go away." We stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of what had happened settling over us like a heavy fog. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming yesterday, now felt oppressive, its shadows hiding unseen threats. "We should leave," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes scanning the trees as if expecting something to emerge. I nodded, relief flooding through me at the decision to escape this place. We packed up camp in record time, constantly looking over our shoulders, jumping at every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. The carefree mood of yesterday was gone, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the rustling of our gear as we stuffed it into our backpacks. As we hiked back to our car, the forest seemed to watch us, its silence heavy and judgmental. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed, every shadow hiding a lurking figure, every rustle in the undergrowth a potential threat. Sarah walked close to me, our hands clasped tightly together, her grip a lifeline in the uncertainty. It wasn't until we were in the car, doors locked, engine running, that we both let out a long, shuddering breath. Sarah turned to me, her face pale, her eyes still wide with lingering fear. "What do you think they wanted?" she asked, her voice small. I shook my head, staring at the road ahead as the forest receded in the rearview mirror. "I don't know. Maybe they were just trying to scare us." "Well, it worked," Sarah said with a shaky laugh, her attempt at humor falling flat in the weight of our shared terror. We were quiet for most of the drive home, each lost in our own thoughts. The hum of the engine a small comfort against the memories of the night. I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind, the whispers, the footsteps, the footprints circling our tent, wondering what would have happened if I confronted our nocturnal visitors. Would they have fled, or would things have taken an even darker turn? It wasn't until we were almost home that Sarah spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "You know, despite everything, I'm glad we went." I looked at her in surprise, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. "Really?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It was terrifying, yes, but I feel like I know you better now, like we've been through something together." I thought about it for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. The fear, the uncertainty, the relief of escape. We'd shared all of it, and it had forged a connection between us that hadn't existed before, a bond tempered in the crucible of that night. "Yeah," I said, reaching over to take her hand, her warmth grounding me. "I'm glad we went too." As we pulled up to Sarah's apartment, she turned to me, her smile tinged with a lingering unease. "Next time, though, let's stick to campsites with other people around, okay?" I laughed, some of the tension of the past 24 hours finally starting to dissipate. "Deal." We shared a kiss goodbye, and as I watched Sarah walk to her door, her silhouette framed by the glow of the streetlights, I felt a mix of emotions: relief that we were safe, gratitude for the deepened bond between us, but also a lingering unease. Because part of me knew that no matter how many people were around, no matter how well lit or patrolled a campsite might be, we could never be truly safe. The wilderness held secrets, and some of them were darker than we could imagine. As I drove home, I couldn't help but wonder about those whispers in the night. What were they saying? What did they want? And most chillingly, would they be waiting if we ever returned? I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts, but as I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us home from those dark woods, something that whispered and watched and waited, biding its time until we ventured into the wilderness once more. The sound of the axe splitting would echo through the night, each rhythmic thud sending shivers down my spine, sharp and cold. We were miles from civilization, lost in an endless sea of trees, and someone, or something, was out there, chopping wood in the darkness. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When Mike suggested a weekend hiking trip to celebrate the end of our college exams, it sounded perfect. Just 3 friends, Mike, Sarah, and me, out in the great outdoors, a chance to unwind before we scattered for our summer internships. Sarah was on board immediately, her eyes lighting up at the prospect of adventure, her enthusiasm infectious. I was more hesitant. Nature and I had never been on the best of terms, always seeming to conspire against my city-bred instincts. But their excitement pulled me in, and soon I was packing my backpack with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. We set out early Friday morning, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, casting a warm glow over the forest. The trail started off easy enough, winding through sun-dappled forests and alongside babbling brooks, the air fresh with the scent of pine and earth. Mike led the way, map in hand, confidently pointing out landmarks and spouting facts about the local flora and fauna, his voice carrying a contagious energy. Sarah hung on his every word, her laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves, and I found myself relaxing, caught up in their enthusiasm, the wave exams lifting with each step. But as the day wore on, the trail became less distinct, the markers we'd been following growing sparse, then disappearing altogether. Mike's confident stride faltered, and I caught him checking and rechecking the map with increasing frequency, his brow furrowing. "Are we lost?" Sarah finally asked, voicing the fear we'd all been harboring, her voice tinged with unease. Mike's forced laugh did little to reassure us. "Of course not. We're just taking the scenic route." As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long, jagged shadows across our path, the reality of our situation became impossible to ignore. We were well and truly lost. "We should make camp," I suggested, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, the words steady despite the tightening in my chest. "It'll be easier to find our way in the daylight." We found a small clearing and set up our tents with grim efficiency, the cheerful banter that had filled our hike replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the rustle of equipment and the occasional frustrated sigh. As darkness fell, The forest came alive with unfamiliar sounds. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every rustling leaf seemed to hide some unseen threat. We huddled around our meager campfire, the flickering flames casting grotesque shadows on the surrounding trees, their shapes twisting like specters in the night. "Look," Sarah said suddenly, pointing into the gloom, her voice sharp with hope. "Is that a light?" We all turned, squinting into the darkness. There, barely visible through the dense foliage, was a faint glow, warm and inviting. "It must be a cabin," Mike said, hope creeping into his voice, his eyes brightening. "Maybe they have a phone, or at least can point us in the right direction." The decision to investigate was unanimous. Anything was better than spending the night lost in the woods, vulnerable to whatever lurked in the shadows. We gathered our essentials, flashlights, water bottles, a few energy bars, and set off toward the light, stumbling over roots and ducking under low-hanging branches, the forest seeming to close in around us. As we drew closer, the faint glow resolved into the warm light of windows. It was indeed a cabin, small and weathered but solid-looking, with a thin trail of smoke curling from the chimney, a promise of warmth and safety. Mike knocked on the door, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet forest, reverberating through the still air. We waited, hearts pounding, but there was no response. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Is anyone home? We're lost hikers. We could use some help." Still nothing. Mike tried the door handle, and to our surprise, turned easily. The door swung open with a creak that set my teeth on edge, the sound echoing in the silence. "Should we go in?" I asked, hesitation clear in my voice, my hand hovering near the doorframe. "We can't stay out here," Mike replied, his tone firm but his eyes darting nervously. "We'll explain when they get back." The interior of the cabin was sparse but cozy, the air warm from a fire burning low in the hearth, explaining the smoke we'd seen. There was a small kitchenette with a rusty sink, a table with two mismatched chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against one wall, its blanket neatly tucked in. Everything was tidy, almost too perfect, but there was something off about it all. It felt unused, like a stage set rather than a real home, the surfaces gleaming with an unnatural cleanliness. We settled in, grateful for the shelter, the warmth seeping into our bones. Sarah found some canned goods in a cupboard, beans and corn, and we heated them over the fire, the aroma filling the small space. As we ate, the tension began to ease, and we even managed a few laughs as we recounted the day's misadventures, the absurdity of getting lost on a simple hike. It was well past midnight when we finally decided to get some sleep. Sarah took the bed, its springs creaking under her weight, while Mike and I spread our sleeping bags on the hardwood floor, the fire's dying embers casting a faint glow. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the sound woke me. At first, in my groggy state, I couldn't place it, my mind sluggish with exhaustion. Then it came again, the unmistakable sound of an axe biting into wood, sharp and deliberate. I sat up, heart racing, the air suddenly cold against my skin. "Mike," I whispered, shaking him awake, my voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment, then nodded, his face pale in the dying firelight, his eyes wide with the same fear I felt. We woke Sarah, and the three of us huddled together, listening to the steady rhythm of chopping, each thud reverberating through the cabin walls. "It must be the cabin's owner," Sarah whispered, but her voice lacked conviction, her hands clutching the edge of the blanket. "At this hour?" I countered, my mind racing. "And why wouldn't they have come inside first?" The chopping continued, sometimes fading as if moving away, then growing louder again, circling the cabin, never staying in one place for long. "We should look," Mike said finally, his voice steady but his hand shaking as he gripped his flashlight. "Maybe they're in trouble." Part of me wanted to barricade the door and wait for daylight, but I knew Mike was right, we couldn't just hide. Slowly, cautiously, we opened the door and peered out into the night. The forest was silver in the moonlight, every shadow sharp and deep, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The sound of chopping had stopped, leaving an eerie silence. We ventured out, our flashlight beams sweeping the trees, cutting through the darkness like blades. My beam caught something, and I gasped. There, not 20 feet from the cabin, was a freshly cut stump, the wood pale where the axe had bitten into it, the cut so new that sap still glistened on the surface, catching the moonlight. "That," "That wasn't there before," Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, her flashlight trembling in her hand. We moved on, finding more freshly cut trees. Some just stumps, others fully felled, their branches still trembling as if they just hit the ground, the air heavy with the scent of fresh cut wood. But there was no sign of whoever or whatever had done the cutting. No axe, no woodcutter, just the silent evidence of their work. We searched for what felt like hours, jumping at every sound, our flashlight beams jerking wildly at imagined movements in the shadows. But we found nothing, no explanation for the impossible timber we discovered. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, we made our way back to the cabin, none of us speaking, the weight of the night pressing down on us. Inside, everything was as we'd left it, but now in the growing light, I noticed something I'd missed before. There was no dust anywhere, not on the shelves, not on the floor, not even in the corners where it always accumulates. This place, this refuge in the woods, was not a home. It had never been a home. It was something else, something unnatural, waiting. "We need to leave," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, hollow and urgent. No one argued. We grabbed our packs and were out the door in minutes, not even bothering to erase the signs of our presence. Somehow I knew it didn't matter. By nightfall, the cabin would be as pristine as we'd found it, waiting for the next lost hikers to stumble upon its false promise of safety. We walked for hours, the rising sun at our backs, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill in my bones. No one suggested checking the map or trying to find a trail. We just walked, putting as much distance between us and that cabin as we could. It was mid-afternoon when we heard the sound of traffic, a faint hum that grew into a lifeline. We emerged from the woods onto the side of a highway, the asphalt a stark contrast to the wild forest. A passing motorist took pity on us, her minivan smelling faintly of coffee and kid snacks, and gave us a ride to the nearest town. As we sat in a diner, waiting for our parents to come pick us up, we tried to make sense of what had happened, but the more we talked, the less real it seemed. By the time our rides arrived, we'd all but convinced ourselves it had been some sort of shared hallucination, brought on by exhaustion and fear. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood, echoing through the darkness. I wonder about that cabin in the woods, who or what is out there, endlessly chopping, waiting for the next lost souls to stumble into its clearing. I haven't been camping since that trip. Sarah and Mike have tried to convince me to give it another go. Their voices gentle but persistent, but I always find an excuse. They don't push too hard. I think deep down they understand. Because the truth is, we brought something back with us from those woods, a knowledge that the world is stranger and more dangerous than we'd ever imagined. And some nights, when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I could swear I hear it, the soft, steady rhythm of an axe, calling me back to the deep, dark heart of the forest. The moment Tommy stumbled out of the woods, I knew something was terribly wrong. His eyes were wide and unfocused, his clothes torn and streaked with dirt, but it was the silence that scared me the most. Our chatty, curious 6-year-old, who usually filled the air with questions and laughter, was completely mute. The shadows lurking behind his eyes told me that whatever had happened in those 3 hours would haunt us all for years to come. This was supposed to be the perfect family vacation. My wife Lisa had been planning this camping trip for months, a chance to disconnect from our busy lives, to bond as a family, and to introduce our kids to the wonders of the great outdoors. We'd chosen a secluded spot by Whispering Lake, far from the crowded campgrounds and noisy RV parks, where the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Just us, the trees, and the promise of a peaceful retreat. The first day had been idyllic, like a scene from a storybook. We set up our tent in a clearing near the lake, the canvas snapping in the wind as we worked together, Tommy giggling as he helped by handing us tent pegs. We went for a short hike, the forest alive with the scent of pine and the chatter of squirrels. That afternoon, we taught Tommy and his older sister, Emma, how to skip stones across the lake's glassy surface, their laughter echoing as the stones danced across the water. As the sun set, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples, we roasted marshmallows over the campfire, the sweet, smoky aroma filling the air. Tommy's attempts at making s'mores left his face sticky with chocolate, and we laughed until our sides ached. feeling like we'd stepped into a postcard of the perfect American family vacation. The next morning, Lisa and I woke early, savoring a quiet cup of coffee by the smoldering remains of last night's fire while the kids slept in. The lake shimmered in the dawn light, its surface unbroken, and the forest was still, save for the occasional bird call. We talked in hushed tones about how well the trip was going, how relaxed we all felt away from the constant ping of notifications and the pressure of schedules. It wasn't until mid-morning that we realized something was off. Emma emerged from the tent, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair a tangled mess. But there was no sign of Tommy. At first, we weren't too worried. He was probably just exploring near the campsite, fascinated by some bug or interesting rock, his curiosity always pulling him toward discovery. But as the minutes ticked by, and our calls of Tommy, "Where are you?" went unanswered, panic began to set in, sharp and cold. We searched the immediate area, our voices growing more frantic with each passing moment, the forest that had seemed so welcoming now feeling oppressive, its dense canopy hiding our little boy from view. Lisa's face was pale, her hands trembling as she pushed through the underbrush, calling Tommy's name. Hours passed in a blur of fear and desperate searching. We called the park rangers, and soon our quiet campsite was a hub of activity, with search parties organized and dogs brought in to track Tommy's scent, their barks echoing through the trees. I watched as Lisa's face grew more drawn with each passing hour, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her hands clutching Tommy's favorite stuffed dinosaur, which he'd left behind in the tent. Just when I thought I couldn't bear another moment of this nightmare, there was a shout from the edge of our campsite. Tommy had wandered out of the woods, alone and unharmed, at least physically. The relief I felt at seeing him was immediate but fleeting, tempered by the realization that something was very, very wrong. He didn't run to us with his usual exuberance, didn't cry or call out. He just stood there, swaying slightly, his eyes unfocused and distant, staring at something only he could see. When Lisa rushed to embrace him, her arms open wide, he flinched away from her touch, his small body tensing. My heart broke as I saw the hurt and confusion flash across her face, her hands hovering in the air, unsure. This wasn't our Tommy, not the boy who'd been laughing over Esmores the night before. Whatever had happened in those woods had changed him, stolen something vital from his spirit. The park rangers wanted to take him to the hospital for a checkup, but Tommy became hysterical at the suggestion of leaving the campsite. It was the first sound he'd made since his return, and his screams tore through the trees, high and piercing, sending birds scattering from their perches. In the end, a doctor was brought to us, a kind woman with gentle hands who performed a cursory examination in the comfort of our tent. Physically, Tommy was fine, a few scratches and bruises, nothing serious, she said, but when she tried to ask him what had happened, he curled into a ball, rocking back and forth, refusing to speak, his eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance. We decided to cut our trip short, packing up camp with an efficiency born of desperation. All I wanted was to get my family home, to surround Tommy with the familiar and safe, to erase the shadow that clung to him. But as we drove away from Whispering Lake, the forest receding in the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving something behind, or worse, bringing something unknown home with us. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and worried conversations. Tommy remained silent, spending most of his time curled up in his bed, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, its worn fabric a small comfort. We tried everything to get him to open up, his favorite foods, pizza and chocolate chip cookies, his beloved TV shows, their cheerful theme songs echoing through the house, even a trip to the toy store, where he usually begged for new action figures. Nothing worked. Nothing broke through the wall he'd built around himself, his silence a heavy presence in our home. It was on the fourth night after our return that I first noticed the marks. I'd gone to check on Tommy before turning in, a habit I'd developed since our return, needing to see his chest rise and fall to quiet my own fears. As I tucked the blanket around him, my hand brushed against his arm, and I felt something odd, raised welts, almost like braille, beneath my fingertips. Heart pounding, I gently turned on his bedside lamp, its soft glow casting shadows across the room. There, on Tommy's arms and peeking out from beneath his pajama top, were strange, intricate patterns. They looked almost like burns, but with a precision that seemed impossible. Swirls and lines interconnected in a way that made my eyes ache if I stared too long, as if they were trying to pull my mind into their labyrinthine depths. I called for Lisa, my voice shaking, barely above a whisper. Together, we examined our son, finding more of these bizarre markings across his back and legs, some faint, others stark against his pale skin. How had we missed this? How had the doctor at the campsite not seen them? "We need to take him to the hospital," Lisa whispered, her voice tight with fear, her hands trembling as she traced the patterns with a hesitant finger. I nodded, moving to wake Tommy, but as soon as my hand touched his shoulder, his eyes snapped open. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I could have sworn they glowed with an inner light, an unnatural shimmer that vanished when he blinked. Then he was just my little boy again, looking confused and scared, his small body curling tighter around his dinosaur. "Daddy," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. I had a bad dream. Relief flooded through me at the sound of his voice, a fragile thread connecting us back to the boy we knew. "It's okay, buddy," I said, gathering him into my arms, his warmth grounding me. "You're safe now." It was just a dream, but even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. The marks on his skin were all too real, a tangible reminder that whatever had happened in those woods was far from over. Over the next few weeks, Tommy slowly began to return to his old self. He started talking again, short sentences at first, then longer ones, his voice regaining its familiar lilt. He played with his toys, laughed at Emma's silly jokes, the sound of balm to our frayed nerves. But he never spoke about what happened during those missing hours, and any mention of camping or the woods would send him into a state of panic, his eyes wide, his breath hitching as he clung to us. The marks faded slowly, becoming less prominent but never fully disappearing, faint scars that seemed to shimmer in certain lights. We took him to countless doctors, specialists in dermatology and psychology, but none could explain the strange patterns. Some dismissed them as an unusual allergic reaction. Others suggested some sort of self-inflicted wounds, their explanations hollow and unconvincing. I knew deep in my gut that it was something else entirely, something beyond the realm of medical science. Months passed, and life settled into a new normal, a fragile routine built around protecting Tommy. But there were moments, fleeting instances, when I'd catch him staring off into space, his fingers tracing the faded marks on his arms, his expression distant, as if he were listening to something far away. In those moments, I could see the shadow of whatever had happened in the woods pass across his face, a silent echo of fear. We never went camping again. The tent and sleeping bags gathered dust in our garage, relics of a vacation that had changed everything. But sometimes, late at night, I'd find Tommy sitting by his window, staring out into the darkness, his small silhouette framed by the moonlight. I'd wonder if he was looking for something, or if something out there was looking for him. The woods had taken something from our son, something we couldn't name or understand, and though Tommy was back with us, laughing and playing like any normal child, I couldn't shake the feeling that a part of him was still out there, lost among the whispering trees and hidden shadows of the forest. As I watch him sleep now, peaceful and seemingly untouched by the trauma of that day, I can't help but wonder what really happened in those woods, what left those strange marks on my son's skin, and most chillingly, will it ever come back to claim the rest of him? The answers, if they exist, remain hidden in the silent depths of Whispering Lake and the dark heart of the forest that surrounds it. For the sake of our sanity and our family's peace, perhaps it's better if they stay there, locked away in the wilderness, never to be uncovered. But on quiet nights, when the wind rustles through the trees outside our suburban home, I find myself listening for whispers, for secrets, for some clue to the mystery that changed our lives. And in those moments, I hold my breath, hoping that the forest and its secrets remain far, far away from the sun it once tried to claim. The scream pierced the night, jolting me awake, a sharp, desperate sound that cut through the stillness like a blade. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the howl of the wind. It was human, raw, and terrifyingly close. As I fumbled for my flashlight, my brother Jake's voice broke through the darkness, tense and urgent. "Did you hear that? We hadn't planned on camping in these woods." Jake and I were on a cross-country road trip, headed to visit our grandparents, the open road stretching before us with a promise of freedom. We'd been driving for hours, the hum of the highway lulling us into a weary haze when fatigue set in. The idea of pitching our tent in the dense forest beside the highway seemed like a better alternative to risking a crash from falling asleep at the wheel. Now, as another scream echoed through the trees, sharper and more panicked than the first. I regretted that decision with every fiber of my being. Jake and I scrambled out of our sleeping bags, nearly tripping over each other in our haste to unzip the tent. The cool night air hit us like a slap, sharp and bracing as we emerged, our flashlight beams slicing through the inky blackness. The forest was a wall of shadows, the trees looming tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice wavering slightly, betraying the fear we both felt. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" Silence answered us, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the faint whisper of the wind. Then faintly, we heard it again, a voice barely more than a whisper, fragile and pleading. "Help me, please." We exchanged a glance, fear and determination warring in our eyes, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. We couldn't ignore this. Someone was in trouble, and we were the only ones here to help. "Which direction did it come from?" I asked, sweeping my flashlight in a wide arc, its beam catching on gnarled roots and tangled underbrush. Jake pointed to our left, his hand steady despite the tremor in his voice. "I think it was that way. Come on." We set off into the woods, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of pine needles, each step taking us deeper into the unknown. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, casting jagged shadows that danced in the flashlight's glow. Every snapping twig made my heart lurch. Every rustling leaf felt like a threat lurking just out of sight. We walked for what felt like hours, calling out periodically, "Hello? We're here to help," straining our ears for any response. The voice didn't come again, but we pressed on, driven by the need to help and the growing fear of what we might find, our breaths visible in the chilly air. Just as I was about to suggest we turn back, Jake's flashlight beam caught something, a glint of metal in the underbrush, half hidden by leaves. "Look," he said, pointing, his voice tight with anticipation. We approached cautiously, pushing aside the dense foliage, the damp leaves brushing against our hands. There, half buried in dirt and pine needles, was a walkie-talkie, its plastic casing scratched and worn, the antenna bent at an odd angle. Jake picked it up, turning it over in his hands, his brow furrowed. It looked old, like something from a bygone era, but when he pressed the power button, a red light flickered to life, weak but undeniable. For a moment, we just stared at it, unsure what to make of our discovery, the weight of the object heavy in the silence. Then, with a burst of static that made us both jump, a voice crackled through the speaker. "Help me, please. Is anyone there?" The voice was clearer now, unmistakably coming from the device in Jake's hands, a man's voice, hoarse and desperate, each word laced with pain. Jake pressed the talk button, his thumb trembling slightly. "Hello? We hear you. Where are you? What's wrong?" More static, then the voice came again, fainter this time. "Lost. Injured. Can't move. Please help." A chill ran down my spine, cold and sharp. Something about this didn't feel right. How had this person gotten so deep into the woods with just a walkie-talkie? And why did the voice sound so off, as if it were echoing from somewhere far beyond the device? Jake, however, seemed galvanized by the response, his jaw set with determination. "We're coming to help you," he said into the walkie-talkie. "Can you give us any landmarks, anything to help us find you?" The reply was immediate this time, the voice suddenly stronger, almost urgent. Yes, I'm near a large rock formation. Looks like a face. Hurry, please." Jake turned to me, his face set, his eyes burning with resolve. "We have to find him." I hesitated, my stomach twisting with unease. "Jake, I don't know about this. Maybe we should go back, call the police or park rangers, and tell them what?" He cut in, his voice sharp. "That we heard a voice on an old walkie-talkie? By the time they get here, it could be too late. We're already out here. We have to try." Reluctantly, I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. We continued deeper into the forest, now guided by the intermittent pleas for help coming through the walkie-talkie, each transmission crackling with static. The voice grew more insistent, more desperate, urging us forward, describing landmarks. A twisted tree, a small stream that we never seemed to reach, always insisting we were close. The trees grew denser, the darkness more oppressive, our flashlight beams barely penetrating the gloom. I found myself jumping at every sound, imagining eyes watching us from the shadows, my pulse racing with each step. "Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, my breath catching in my throat. "Something's not right. This feels wrong." He didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his voice was tight with tension, his flashlight beam jittering across the trees. "I know, but we can't just leave someone out here to die." We pressed on, the walkie-talkie our constant companion, its static a haunting underscore to our steps. It was Jake who spotted it first, his beam catching a faint outline in the distance. "Look," he said, pointing ahead. "Is that the rock formation?" In the gloom, barely visible, was a massive outcropping of stone, its jagged edges looming against the night sky. As we drew closer, I could see what the voice had meant. The rocks did indeed resemble a face, with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth, its features twisted into a grotesque grin in the harsh light of our flashlights. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice echoing off the stone, swallowed by the forest. "We're here. Where are you?" Silence. Even the walkie-talkie had gone quiet, its red light dimming as if drained of power. We approached the rock formation cautiously, the face seeming to leer at us, its stone features unsettlingly lifelike. "There's no one here," I said, a mixture of relief and frustration in my voice, my hands clenching around the flashlight. "Jake, we need to go back. This isn't safe." But Jake wasn't listening. He was staring at something on the ground near the base of the rocks, his beam fixed on a spot in the dirt. As I moved closer, I saw what had caught his attention. Another walkie-talkie, identical to the one we'd found earlier, half buried in the soil, its casing scratched and worn. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach, heavy and suffocating. "Jake," I said, my voice shaking, "we need to leave. Now." He nodded, his face pale in the flashlight's beam, his eyes wide with the same fear I felt. We turned to go, only to find our way blocked by dense undergrowth that hadn't been there moments before, the branches tangled and impenetrable, as if the forest itself had shifted to trap us. That's when we heard it, the voice, but this time it wasn't coming from the walkie-talkie. It was all around us, echoing from the trees, from the rocks, from the very air itself, a chorus of whispers. "Help me, please." We ran, branches whipping in our faces, roots seeming to reach up to trip us. The forest a labyrinth of shadows and terror. The voice followed us, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always just out of reach, its pleas morphing into a taunting chant. I don't know how long we ran or in what direction, only the pounding of my heart and the terror driving me forward, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. When we finally burst out of the tree line onto the shoulder of the highway, the asphalt a stark contrast to the wild forest, I nearly cried with relief. Our tent was there, right where we'd left it, its canvas a fragile beacon of safety. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of approaching headlights, a sign of civilization, of escape. We'd made it. As we stood there, gasping for breath, Jake suddenly stiffened beside me. "Listen," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I held my breath, straining my ears. At first, I heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the approaching car. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, coming from our tent. "Help me, please." We didn't wait. We grabbed what we could, our backpacks, a few scattered belongings, threw them into the car, and drove away, leaving the tent and everything in it behind, the canvas flapping in the wind like a ghost. We drove through the night, neither of us speaking, both jumping at every crackle of static from the radio, the sound too close to the walkie-talkie's haunting voice. It's been years since that night, but I still wake up sometimes, drenched in sweat, the phantom sound of that voice echoing in my ears. Jake and I don't talk about it much. What is there to say? We never found out who or was calling for help in those woods, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I'll hear a burst of static from a nearby electronic device, and for a split second, I'll tense, waiting to hear those words that have haunted me for so long. "Help me, please." And I'll wonder, with a chill running down my spine, if whatever was in those woods is still out there, still calling, still waiting for someone to answer. The first gunshot shattered the night like a thunderclap, jolting me from a fitful sleep, my heart leaping into my throat. For a moment, I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, pulse racing, trying to convince myself it was just a dream, a remnant of some half-forgotten nightmare. Then another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of a bullet tearing through canvas, a sharp rip that sent a chill through my bones. We'd come to these woods to escape the chaos of the city, to reconnect with nature and each other, to find a moment of peace. Now, as I listened to the terrified whimpers of my friends in the darkness, I realized we'd stumbled into a nightmare far worse than anything we'd left behind. It had all started innocently enough. Alex, my best friend since college, had suggested the camping trip as a way to celebrate our recent promotions, a return to the carefree adventures of our youth. Just like old times, he'd said, his eyes gleaming with excitement, his grin infectious. No phones, no internet, just us in the great outdoors. Sarah and Mike, our significant others, had taken some convincing. They were more the glamping type, accustomed to campsites with hot showers and Wi-Fi. Their idea of roughing it involving a cozy cabin with all the amenities. But Alex's enthusiasm and my assurances that it would be an adventure won them over, their reluctance giving way to cautious excitement. We'd chosen a spot deep in the national forest, far from the designated campgrounds, where the wilderness stretched unbroken for miles. It was technically allowed but discouraged due to the lack of facilities and the potential dangers of the backcountry. We were young, confident, and perhaps a little foolish, drawn to the idea of true isolation, a chance to really get away from it all. The first 2 days had been idyllic, a perfect escape from the grind of daily life. We hiked through sun-dappled forests, the air rich with the scent of pine and earth, the trails winding past moss-covered rocks and sparkling streams. We swam in crystal-clear waters, the cold shock of the stream invigorating, our laughter echoing through the trees. In the evenings, we gathered around a campfire, its warm glow pushing back the darkness, talking and laughing under a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch. It felt like we were the only people in the world, the forest our private sanctuary. But on the third day, things began to change, subtle at first, like a shadow creeping across the sun. We noticed small signs, branches snapped in unnatural ways as if something heavy had passed through, strange markings on trees, jagged lines that didn't look like animal scratches, and once I could have sworn I saw a flash of orange in the underbrush, gone before I could point it out to the others, a fleeting glimpse that left me uneasy. Probably just wildlife, Alex had said when I mentioned my concerns, his tone dismissive but his eyes scanning the trees. We are in their territory after all. But as the day wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, a persistent itch at the back of my neck. That night, huddled around our campfire, the forest seemed to press in around us, the darkness beyond our circle of light filled with unseen threats. The cheerful banter of previous nights gave way to a tense quiet, our laughter forced, and we went to bed early, the atmosphere too heavy for our usual late-night chats. I'd lain awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sound of the forest, crickets, owls, the rustle of leaves, before finally drifting into an uneasy sleep, my dreams troubled by vague, looming shapes. Now, as another shot rang out, followed by a chorus of frightened birds taking flight, their wings beating frantically against the night, I knew my fears hadn't been unfounded. "Everyone okay?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heart, the air thick with panic. "What the hell is going on?" Mike's voice was tight with fear, his words sharp in the darkness. "Shoo," Sarah hissed, her tone fierce despite her trembling hands. "They might hear us." Slowly, carefully, I unzipped my sleeping bag and crawled to the tent entrance, my movements deliberate to avoid making noise. Peering out through a small gap in the flap, I scanned the area around our campsite. The moon was full, casting an eerie silver light over the clearing, illuminating the trees in stark relief. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the familiar shapes of our gear and the smoldering remains of the fire. Then a movement caught my eye, a figure clad in bright orange moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing, their silhouette stark against the moonlight. As I watched, frozen in terror, another figure joined the first, both carrying rifles, their movements purposeful. Hunters. We were being shot at by hunters. I relayed what I'd seen to the others in hushed tones, my voice shaking as I described the figures in orange. The relief that it wasn't some crazed killer was quickly replaced by a new fear. These hunters were shooting blindly in the dark, and to them, any movement could be a target. "We need to let them know we're here," Alex said, his usual bravado replaced by grim determination, his hands clenched into fists. "Are you crazy?" Sarah whispered furiously, her eyes wide with panic. If we go out there, they might shoot us. If we stay here, they definitely will. I countered, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. I counted, those last shots went right through the tent. It's a miracle no one was hit. We argued in whispers for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, our voices low and urgent, each of us grappling with the impossible choice. In the end, we knew we had no option. We had to make our presence known. Slowly, cautiously, we emerged from the tent, the night air cool on my skin, raising goosebumps that had little to do with the temperature. We huddled together, our breaths visible in the moonlight, unsure of what to do next, our makeshift plan feeling flimsy against the reality of armed hunters. "Hello," Alex called out, his voice cracking slightly, the sound carrying into the darkness. "We're campers. Please don't shoot." For a long moment, there was silence, the forest holding its breath. Then, from the darkness, came a gruff voice, rough and startled. "What the hell? Who's out there?" "Campers," I shouted, finding my voice, my hands raised instinctively. "We're just campers, please. We're unarmed." More silence, then the sound of twigs snapping underfoot, each crack like a gunshot in the quiet. Two men emerged from the tree line, their orange vests garish in the moonlight, their rifles lowered but their fingers still close to the triggers, ready to act. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" the older of the two men asked, his face a mix of confusion and anger, his beard streaked with gray. "Camping," Mike said, a hint of defiance in his voice, his shoulders squared despite the fear in his eyes. "It's allowed, you know." The younger hunter snorted, his expression skeptical. "Yeah, if you've got a death wish. Don't you know this area is full of bears? We've been tracking one for days." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The strange markings we'd seen, the feeling of being watched, it hadn't been these hunters. There was something else out there, something far more dangerous, lurking in the shadows. We didn't know," Sarah stammered, her voice shaking, her hands clasped tightly together. "We thought we were alone out here." The older hunter shook his head, his expression softening slightly, though his eyes remained wary. "You're lucky we didn't hit any of you." Saw movement in the dark and thought, well, it doesn't matter what we thought. You folks need to get out of here, and fast. As if to punctuate his words, a low growl echoed through the clearing, deep and menacing, raising the hairs on my arms. We all froze, even the hunters, their experienced eyes scanning the tree line, their rifles snapping up instinctively. Inside the tent, now, the older hunter ordered, his voice low and urgent, his rifle trained on the darkness. "We'll keep watch until dawn, then we're all getting the hell out of here." We didn't argue, scrambling back into the tent, the canvas offering little comfort against the threat outside. The next few hours were the longest of my life. We huddled together, jumping at every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, while the hunters stood guard outside, their silhouettes visible through the tent's thin walls. Occasionally, we'd hear them murmuring to each other, their voices low and tense, or the click of a rifle being readied, each sound amplifying our fear. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, painting the tent in shades of gray, we emerged, bleary-eyed and shaken. The hunters looked haggard, their eyes bloodshot from a night without sleep, their faces etched with exhaustion. "All right," the older one said, his voice gruff but steady. "Pack up your gear. We're leaving." We broke camp in record time, our earlier carelessness replaced by a grim efficiency, our hands moving quickly to dismantle the tents and stuff our belongings into backpacks. As we shouldered our packs, I noticed deep claw marks on a nearby tree, gashes that hadn't been there the day before, the wood splintered and raw. The younger hunter saw me looking and nodded grimly. "That's why we're here," he said, his voice low. "That bear's been causing trouble for weeks. Killed some livestock on a farm down the valley. We've been trying to track it, put it down before it hurt someone." The hike back to our cars was tense and silent, every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush putting us on edge. The hunters flanked our group, their rifles at the ready, their eyes scanning the forest with practiced vigilance. When we finally reached the parking area, the sight of our cars, dusty but gloriously familiar, brought a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled my knees. As we threw our gear into the trunks, The older hunter approached me, his expression serious. "Listen," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I know you folks probably meant no harm, but this isn't a game. Nature's beautiful, sure, but it's also dangerous. Next time, stick to the designated campgrounds. They're there for a reason." I nodded, too exhausted and relieved to feel embarrassed, the weight of his words settling in. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "For everything." He waved off my thanks, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just doing our job. Now get going. And maybe consider a different hobby. Knitting's nice and safe, I hear." As we drove away, leaving the hunters and the dark forest behind, a heavy silence filled the car. We'd gone looking for adventure, for a chance to prove ourselves against the wilderness. Instead, we'd nearly become cautionary tales, our names whispered in warnings about the dangers of the backcountry. That night changed us. We still go camping occasionally, but never again in the deep woods. We stick to well-traveled paths and populated campgrounds, where the presence of others offers a buffer against the unknown. And every time I hear a twig snap in the dark, I remember that night, the shots in the darkness, the growl in the shadows, and the realization that in the wild, we are not the hunters but the hunted. The wilderness is still out there, vast and untamed, a world unto itself. But now I know the truth. It's not a playground, not a backdrop for our adventures. It's a force that doesn't care about our dreams of conquest or our need for thrills. It simply exists, in all its beauty and danger, indifferent to our presence. Sometimes the wisest thing we can do is admire it from a safe distance, leaving the deep woods to those who truly belong there, the creatures that thrive in its shadows, and the secrets it keeps hidden in its heart.